Hi guys, and welcome to America History Tales. Tonight we step into the damp breath of New York's 19th century waterfront where the East River lies dark as old tea. The docks creak under barrels and boots, and the morning fog tastes faintly of coal smoke, salt, and somebody else's breakfast. You are arriving with tired feet, thin pockets, and the brave little illusion that the city has been waiting for you. It has not. New York is busy chewing through stronger people than you. So yes, you probably won't survive this without a little luck, a lot of stubbornness, and perhaps a suspiciously flexible definition of dinner. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And tell us where you are listening from, and what time it is there as the city lamps begin to glow in your imagination. Now dim the lights, and let the river carry you inward. You stand near the lower docks where Manhattan begins not as a skyline but as a working mouth. It swallows ships, crates, fish, coal, immigrants, sailors, widows, runaways, and children who have learned far too early how to look useful. The boards beneath your shoes are slick. Somewhere nearby a horse snorts steam into the chill air. Men shout over one another in English-Irish voices, German voices and accents you cannot yet place. A gull screams as if insulted by history itself. The city smells alive, though not in the polished way later postcards will pretend. It smells of rope soaked in brine, horse manure ground into mud tar, sweat cabbage, cheap tobacco, spoiled fruit, and the sour breath of crowded lodging houses just beyond the respectable streets. You pull your coat tighter if you have one. If you do not, you tuck your arms close and try to make yourself narrower against the wind. A mainstream fact settles around you like the fog by the middle of the 19th century. New York has become the largest city in the United States, swollen by immigration, trade, and industry. Its wealth rises fast, but so does its poverty. The same harbour that brings fortunes also brings thousands of people who arrive with almost nothing. You are one of them now, whether by birth, eviction, migration, widowhood, injury, bad wages, or that famous financial strategy known as having no other choice. You move away from the water and into streets that seem to grow tighter with every step. The city is not yet the vertical forest of glass. People will know later. It is brickwood, stone, smoke, and noise. Carts jolt past iron rims, striking cobbles with a dull clatter. A woman balances a basket against one hip. A boy with bare ankles darts between wheels with the calm confidence of someone who's already made peace with several bad possibilities. You notice how close everything is. Shops lean into sidewalks. Boarding houses press above storefronts. Laundry hangs like tired flags from upper windows. A barrel fire spits near an alley, warming hands that have done too much work before the sun has properly committed to the day. The poor do not simply live in New York. They are packed into it, folded and refolded, tucked into cellars, attics, back rooms, rear houses, and spaces that seem designed by someone who considered air a luxury item. The river is behind you, but it has not left. Its damp follows in your cuffs. It beads along window glass. It crawls into bedding. It makes wood swell and tempers fray. If you have come looking for work, you listen for the language of opportunity barrels to unload coal, to shovel rooms, to scrub bundles, to sew newspapers, to sell. The city does not offer a gentle welcome, it offers tasks. And if your hands can take them, perhaps you eat. A cart of oysters passes, and for a strange moment the smell is almost pleasant. Here is a quirky little truth to tuck under your pillow. Oysters are so common in 19th century New York that they are not the luxury they later become. Poor New Yorkers may eat them from street stands, though. Fresh can be a daring word when applied beside open gutters. Imagine that. A cheap oyster in the morning fog, fancier if you ignore the flies. You keep walking. The cobbles are uneven, and your shoes already softened by wet begin to rub. Around you, the city sorts people with invisible hands. Merchants head one way, clerks another, labourers another. Women hurry with bundles of washing, their fingers cracked by a lie and cold water. Older men sit against walls, watching the docks with the practiced eye of those waiting for someone to need a body for hire. Poverty here is not only hunger, it is uncertainty repeated until it becomes the shape of the day. Will there be work? Will the landlord wait? Will the baby's cough pass? Will the bread stretch? Will the policeman move you along? Will the room still be yours tonight? These questions do not shout. They murmur constantly like rats behind plaster. Historians still argue whether the 19th century slum should be understood mainly as a place of exploitation, a place of community, or both at once. You feel the answer is not tidy. Misery lives here, yes. So does cleverness. So does neighbourly kindness, gossip, music, bargaining, prayer, theft, pride, and the quiet skill of making one coin behave like three. Poverty is not a single note. It's a whole uneasy instrument played badly by the city and beautifully sometimes by those trapped inside it. You pass a doorway where a woman watches you without moving her face. She has seen newcomers before. She knows the look, hopeful, cold, embarrassed by need. Behind her stairs climb into dimness. Somewhere above a baby cries then stops, not comforted, perhaps just tired. The silence after it feels heavier than the sound. A pushcart seller calls out apples. They are bruised but still apples. You consider buying one, then remember that money in your pocket is not money alone. It is rent, bread, thread, coal medicine, laundry soap, and tomorrow's chance. You keep walking. Hunger complains, then lowers its voice. It knows this conversation will continue. The streets begin to bend toward poorer wards where buildings seem less like homes and more like containers for human endurance. You're not yet at the infamous 5 points, not quite, but the city is guiding you there with the subtlety of a tired landlord, pointing to the cheapest room. Mud thickens near the gutters. Children stare from stoops. A dog noses at refuse, somewhere. A bell rings from a church or a shop, and for a moment the sound floats above the smells, clean and distant. You breathe in carefully. The air carries cold smoke, damp wool, frying fat, and the sharp stink of waste. Your body notices before your mind does. Survival here will be physical. It will live in your lungs, stomach, skin, and feet. It will be measured by whether you can climb stairs after 12 hours of work, whether you can sleep through shouting, whether you can swallow watered soup and call it supper with a straight face. Still the city glitters in small places. A window catches pale sunlight. A child laughs at something invisible to you. A woman shakes crumbs from a cloth and sparrows descend like tiny creditors. The river wind lifts the edge of a newspaper pasted against a wall, and you glimpse words about business elections and shipping news. Grand matters floating above streets where a dry sock can feel like a miracle. You take another step inland. The harbour fades behind the roofs, but its promise remains complicated and cruel. New York has opened its gate, not with kindness, but with noise. You have entered. You're poor, tired, and very much awake. Ahead the narrow streets wait, crowded with footsteps, rumours and rooms, where too many people breathe the same used air. You leave the river's damp breath behind, though it still clings to your sleeves, and follow the streets inward until the city begins to tighten around you. The respectable shops thin out. The pavements seem less certain. Brick walls lean closer, windows stare darker, and every doorway appears to have swallowed too many stories to digest comfortably. You're walking toward 5 points. That notorious knot of streets where Anthony Orange and Cross once met in a shape that looked almost harmless on a map. Maps are adorable like that. They never smell the cellar. The first thing you notice is the sound, not one sound, but layers of it. Cartwheels scrape over stones. Babies cry behind warped shutters. Women call to one another from windows. Men bargain, cough, laugh, curse under their breath, though politely enough for our sleepy little journey. Somewhere a fiddle scratches out a tune brave and thin, as if music itself has rented a room it cannot afford. Your own footsteps join the rest, soft in mud, sharp on broken boards, hesitant when you pass an alley too narrow for daylight. 5 Points has already become famous in newspapers, and reform reports usually described it with that dramatic 19th century talent for turning poor people into scenery. It is called dangerous, filthy, immoral, fascinating, tragic, and depending on who is writing, almost theatrical. You, however, do not arrive as a tourist of misery. You arrive as someone looking for a place to sleep, and that changes the view. A dark hallway is not a shocking detail, it's a possible bed. A crowded room is not a moral lesson, it is shelter if the landlord accepts your coins. A mainstream historical fact waits beneath the mud. 5 Points grew partly on land that had once been Collect Pond. A freshwater pond later filled in after becoming polluted. The fill was unstable, damp, and unhealthy, and buildings raised there often suffered from poor foundations and persistent moisture. So when you feel the ground seem almost uncertain beneath you, it is not just imagination. The neighbourhood itself rests on buried water, buried waste, and buried optimism, which is honestly a very New York combination. You pass a house whose front has been patched so many times it looks like a tired face trying to remain polite. Inside, families rent pieces of rooms or corners of rooms or a place on the floor when even a corner is too ambitious. Buildings that once held one household now hold many. A parlour becomes a bedroom becomes a workshop, a cellar becomes a dwelling because someone, somewhere has looked at a damp underground space and thought, yes, a family could almost live there. Humanity does have a talent for turning emergencies into floor plans. The street under your feet is not clean. Refuse collects in gutters. Pigs have roamed some working-class neighbourhoods in earlier decades, acting as unofficial sanitation workers with suspicious enthusiasm. That's the quirky tidbit for this stretch of your walk before modern municipal sanitation urban pigs can be both nuisance and solution, eating scraps while also adding their own special contribution to the street atmosphere. Very efficient if your standards are low and your shoes are washable. You keep moving because stopping too long invites attention. Faces watch from stoops, some are curious, some guarded, some too exhausted to care. A girl with tangled hair carries a pail nearly as large as her torso. A man with a torn coat warms his hands over a small flame in a tin. A woman bends over sewing near a window using every bit of weak light the day is willing to donate. Her needle flashes, once disappears, flashes again. It's a tiny silver heartbeat. Here poverty is public and private at the same time. You see it outside in bare feet, cracked walls and thin coats. But you also sense the hidden part, the shame of asking for credit, the calculation before buying bread, the dread of hearing the landlord on the stairs. You pass a doorway and smell boiled cabbage, wet wool and smoke. Another doorway gives you sour beer, stale straw, and human closeness. Every building breathes out a different version of need. Historians still debate how far the lurid reputation of 5 Points reflected daily reality, and how far it reflected middle-class fear, sensational journalism, and reformers searching for proof of urban decline. Walking here, you suspect both things can be true. The hardship is real, so is the exaggeration. Outsiders describe the neighbourhood as if everyone inside it has chosen chaos as a hobby. You can feel the unfairness of that. Most people here are not performing wickedness. They are surviving rent. A boy bumps your elbow and murmurs an apology too quick to be sincere. You check your pocket. Nothing gone because there was nearly nothing to take. A joke, perhaps, but not a cheerful one. Children here learn the street as other children learn school books. They learn which shopkeeper might give a bruised apple, which policeman swings a stick, which drunk is harmless, which doorway stays warm, which woman will share a crust if her own children have eaten. Their education is practical, detailed, and absolutely not approved by any board of trustees. The buildings draw you deeper. Some have rear houses hidden behind front houses, reached through narrow passages where light falls in thin grey strips. You look down one passage and imagine carrying coal through it, carrying water through it, carrying a feverish child through it at midnight. The walls are close enough to brush your shoulders. Above, lines of laundry cross the air like signals between ships. White, grey, brown, patched again. Cloth tells stories when people cannot afford paper. There is community here, but not the cosy kind that later nostalgia likes to embroider. It is sharper, more necessary. A neighbour may watch your child while you work, then quarrel with you over a shared stove. Someone may lend a cup of meal, then remind you of it for 3 weeks. People know who is ill, who is drinking too much, who has lost work, who has pawned bedding, who has taken in boarders, who has heard of a job. Privacy is thin, help is real, judgment is also real. The walls have ears because the walls are overcrowded. You pass a saloon with its door half open. Warmth rolls out along with voices and the yeasty smell of beer. Inside, men stand shoulder to shoulder, their faces lit amber. For a second the place looks inviting. Then you remember how quickly comfort can become debt. A coin spent there is a coin not spent on bread, though after a day in these streets. You understand why anyone might pay for an hour of forgetting. A little warmth, a little music, a little permission to stop being afraid. A cart rattles by, splashing mud across your hem. You step back and nearly collide with an old woman carrying rags. She gives you a look that says she has survived worse than your clumsiness and will not be offering applause. Her basket smells of damp cloth and ash. Perhaps she sells scraps. Perhaps she sorts them. Perhaps she is carrying the remains of someone's respectability to a pawnbroker. In this neighbourhood, objects travel downward through many hands before becoming useless. A coat becomes a patched coat, then a child's coat, then bedding, then rags, then paper maybe if the rag picker is lucky. The street narrows again and the sky becomes a strip overhead. You think back to the river, to the gulls and dockeries, and realise the city has already changed shape around you. At the waterfront, poverty felt like a rival. Here it feels like enclosure. You have entered a maze built of rent, damp brick and human breath. Still you keep walking, because to survive poverty in this city is to move until you find the next small chance. Ahead a stairwell waits in shadow. Someone says there may be space upstairs, not a room exactly, but space. You place your hand on the railing. It is sticky with age smoke and the touch of hundreds before you. The boards groan under your first step and the air above smells warmer, heavier, and far more crowded than the street below. You climb toward the room that is not really a room while the stairwell narrows around you like a throat. The railing wobbles under your hand. Each step complains in a different tone, one sharp, one hollow, one soft with rot. The smell changes as you rise. Street mud fades behind you, replaced by coal smoke, old cooking grease, damp plaster, unwashed wool lamp oil, and the thick human warmth of too many bodies sharing too little air. At the landing, a door opens before you knock. A woman looks you over quickly, not unkindly, but without the spare energy for ceremony. Her eyes go to your shoes, your bundle, your face, then your hands. Hands tell whether you can work. Hands tell whether you have fallen far or have always been near the bottom. She steps aside and you enter. The room is dim, even though morning still exists outside. A small window faces a wall so close you could almost pass a cup across the gap, assuming anyone had a clean cup, and the optimism to share it. Light arrives, tired, grey, and already used. The ceiling is low. The floor slopes slightly. A stove sits near one wall, black and temperamental, with a kettle that seems to have given up on shining sometime around the previous decade. This is where the day happens. This is where the night happens too. One rented room may be kitchen, bedroom, nursery, sick room, workshop, storage closet, and emotional battlefield all at once. A mattress lies rolled in the corner. 2 children sleep under a coat, or perhaps pretend to sleep because adults are speaking. A table stands beneath the window, scarred by knives, needles, elbows, cups, and debts. There are bundles of cloth stacked beside it, waiting to be sewn or finished. A chair has only 3 reliable legs, but everyone has agreed not to discuss it. A mainstream historical fact settles into the stale air. By the late 19th century, New York tenement houses often packed multiple families into buildings originally designed for far fewer residents, and many apartments had little direct sunlight or ventilation. Early tenements could be especially dark because interior rooms had no windows to the outside. Imagine trying to sleep, cook, sew, nurse a fever, and remain spiritually graceful in a space where even fresh air needs an appointment. You place your bundle near the wall. The woman tells you what the rent will be for your share. Not for privacy. Privacy is not included. Not for comfort. Comfort has taken a better offer uptown. The rent is for permission to occupy a portion of floor, perhaps a corner near the stove if you are lucky, or near the door if you are not. You nod as though this is ordinary, because in this city it is. The air feels soft and heavy when you breathe it. It has been breathed before. It carries the ghost of last night's supper, the dampness of drying clothes, the faint sour smell of bedding that never sees enough sun. There is a chamber pot behind a screen, though screen is a generous word for hanging cloth that has lost its confidence. On a shelf cups a cracked plate, a bit of soap, and a holy card sit together in a quiet arrangement of necessity and hope. A quirky tidbit drifts in with the dust. Some families kept small songbirds in cages, even in crowded tenement rooms, because a bird's song could soften the ugliness of the place and offer a tiny scrap of beauty. Of course, the bird also had to breathe the same air as everyone else, which feels slightly unfair to the bird, but perhaps it understood the bargain. In a hard room, even a fragile sound can become furniture. You notice how carefully people move. The children step around the table without waking the smallest one. The woman lifts the kettle with a cloth because the handle burns. A man, perhaps her husband or a boarder, sits near the wall mending a boot by weak light. Every movement must consider every object. There is no wasted space because wasted space belongs to people with parlours. The room has rules. You learn them without anyone listing them. Do not knock over the water pail. Do not take more coal than agreed. Do not leave scraps where rats will find them unless you want a midnight committee meeting with whiskers. Do not speak too loudly when someone has worked through the night. Do not ask too many questions about who sleeps where, who owes what, or why that young woman in the corner flinches when the stairs creak. The poor live close enough to know everything and politely pretend not to know some of it. Historians still argue whether tenement life destroyed family stability, or whether families used these cramped rooms to defend themselves against a brutal city. You can feel the tension. This room presses people together until tempers spark, but it also gathers them against the outside world. A child is watched by many eyes. A sick woman receives broth from someone nearly as hungry. A boarder's coin may keep the landlord away for another week. Misery crowds the room, yes, but so does strategy. At the table work begins. Cloth is unfolded, thread-bitten needles lifted. If the room is a workshop, daylight is money. You sit where you are told and help if you can. The fabric smells of warehouse dust and other hands. Your fingers stiffen as you sew. Payment will be small, perhaps by the piece, and the piece seems to multiply whenever you blink. There is something almost dreamlike in the repetition, needle down pull through smooth seam, needle down again. Outside carts rattle, inside thread whispers. The stove coughs smoke before it gives heat. Someone opens the window and the outside wall stares back, damp and blank. A draft slips in, cold enough to make the baby twitch under the coat. The window closes again. Fresh air loses the argument to warmth, which is understandable, though your lungs file a complaint. You begin to understand that poverty is not only having too little, it is making too many things serve too many purposes. A shawl is clothing, blanket, curtain, sling, and pawnable asset. A chair is seat, ladder, shelf, and symbol of who gets to rest. A table is for eating, sewing, ironing, sorting, scolding, praying, and sometimes sleeping beneath when floor space vanishes. Even time is folded double. You cook while watching children sew, while listening for the landlord's sleep, while half awake to rats, coughs, and footsteps. As evening approaches, the room grows darker before it grows quieter. A lamp is lit carefully because oil costs money. Its flame wavers and paints the walls in amber. Shadows enlarge the cracks in the plaster. The children become softer shapes. The day's smells deepen. A pot simmers with something thin but warm, and for a moment warmth feels like kindness even when it is mostly steam. You sit with your back against the wall, knees drawn close, listening to the building settle. Above you, someone drags a chair. Below, a baby wails. In the hallway, a man coughs until the sound fades into a groan. You think of the river again, wide and dark, and it seems impossible that so much open water exists so near so many airless rooms. Yet you are inside, you have a place for the night. Not a safe place, exactly, not a clean place, not a quiet place, but a place. In the grammar of poverty that matters, the room holds you with everyone else breathing slowly, smelling of coal cloth damp and endurance, while beyond the door the shared hallway waits with its pails, footsteps, whispers, and the next daily trial that begins before morning fully arrives. Morning does not arrive cleanly here. It seeps in diluted like weak tea poured through a cloth that has seen better days. You wake not to birdsong but to movement. Someone shifting beside you, someone coughing in the hallway, the scrape of a bucket dragged across wood. The room exhales its night air slowly, as if reluctant to admit another day has begun. Your first task is not work, not yet, it is water. You take hold of a pail that has already served too many purposes and step into the corridor. The hallway greets you with a sharper smell than the room. Damp boards, spilled slop old soap, and the faint metallic scent of rusted pipes or buckets. There is no indoor plumbing here, not in any modern sense. Water must be fetched, shared, argued over, protected. You descend the stairs again, careful not to slip. At the bottom, the street is already awake. A line has formed near a public pump down the block. Women, children, a few men who have not yet found work for the day, all waiting with buckets, kettles, barrels, anything that can hold liquid and hope. You join them. The pump stands like a stubborn old machine, its handle worn smooth by thousands of hands. Each pull draws water from somewhere below, though no one can say with confidence how clean that water truly is. Still it is water, and water is life even when it carries unseen dangers. A commonly accepted historical reality presses into this moment in many 19th century New York neighborhoods. Access to clean water was limited, and shared pumps or wells often became contaminated, especially in overcrowded districts. The idea of safe, regulated drinking water belongs to a later chapter of the city's story. For now, you drink what you can get and hope your stomach forgives you. When your turn comes, you work the handle. It resists at first, then yields with a creak. Water gushes out, splashing into your pail, cold and slightly cloudy. You try not to think about where it has been. Around you, conversations rise and fall. Someone complains about a landlord. Someone else whispers about a child with a fever. A woman laughs suddenly, sharp and bright, like a crack in the morning. There is a small, strange detail that lingers in the background of this daily ritual. Some residents believe that adding a splash of alcohol to questionable water can make it safer or at least more tolerable. Whether this is truly effective is uncertain, but it says something about how people adapt. When science is distant and survival is immediate, you trust what seems to work, or at least what has not yet killed you. You lift the heavy pail and begin the walk back. Already your arms ache. Water is weight, and weight becomes part of your day. Up the stairs again, step by step, careful not to spill too much. Each drop lost feels like a small failure. Back in the room, the water is divided, some for drinking, some for cooking, some for washing if there is enough left. Washing is a luxury of timing and supply. You splash your face lightly, rubbing away sleep and grime with cold fingers. It is not enough to feel clean, but it is enough to feel human for a moment. Waste is the other half of this equation, though no one enjoys speaking of it. The chamber pot waits behind its modest curtain. It must be emptied, carried out, disposed of somewhere that will not immediately offend the neighbours or invite complaint. Streets and gutters often become the final destination, especially when formal systems fail or simply do not exist in these parts. You carry the burden carefully, trying not to spill, trying not to meet too many eyes. There is a rhythm to this, a quiet agreement that everyone is doing the same unpleasant work and no one gains anything by pointing it out too loudly. A question still lingers among those who study this period: to what extent did the lack of proper sanitation directly shape the health crises of the time, and how much responsibility lay with city authorities versus property owners? The answer is tangled like everything here. Blame shifts depending on who is speaking. but the consequences settle firmly on people like you. You return inside once more, lighter now, though not by much. The room has warmed slightly. The stove is lit again, coaxed into cooperation with bits of coal and patience. Someone stirs a pot. The smell is simple, thin, but comforting. Privacy remains a rare commodity. Every action is shared, observed, or overheard. You learn to create small pockets of invisibility within the crowd. A turned back, a lowered voice, a moment of stillness while others move around you. It is not true privacy, but it is enough to protect a thought, a memory, a brief escape. Outside the street continues its restless motion. Vendors call out their goods. Children weave between adults. A cart tips slightly as it hits a rut, spilling something that will quickly become part of the general street mixture. Life here does not pause for inconvenience, it absorbs it. You sit for a moment cradling a cup of water. It is not warm, not flavoured, not special in any way. But it is yours, at least for now. You sip slowly, aware that each swallow carries both relief and risk. There is a certain skill in managing these daily necessities. Knowing when to fetch water before the line grows too long. Knowing which pump is less likely to make you ill. Knowing how to stretch a bucket across multiple needs. These are not lessons written in books. They are learned through repetition, through mistakes, through watching others and remembering what worked. The room fills again with the quiet industry of survival. Sewing resumes. Boots are repaired. Plans are made in low voices. Someone mentions a possible job. Someone else doubts it. Hope flickers not brightly but persistently. You realise that survival here is built from these small repeated acts. Fetching water, disposing of waste, sharing space, avoiding illness when possible, enduring it when not. None of it feels grand or heroic. It feels ordinary, and that is what makes it so heavy. Yet there is also resilience, though. The word itself would feel too grand if spoken aloud in this room. It is simply what people do. They continue. They adapt. They find ways to live within constraints that would seem impossible from a distance. You set your cup aside and prepare for the next part of the day. Work will come or it will not. Either way, the city expects you to move to try to endure. The water bucket rests in the corner, already less full than when you carried it up. It will not last long, so nothing here does. Before sunrise has finished deciding what colour the city should be, you are already moving. The room behind you is still dim, crowded with sleeping shapes and the soft rustle of people pretending they are not awake yet. But work, when it appears, does not wait politely beside the bed. It must be chased, cornered, begged from strangers, and sometimes accepted in forms that make your back ache before breakfast. You step into the hallway with your shawl or coat pulled close. Down the stairs, past the sour smell of last night's ashes, out into the street where the air feels colder than it has any right to be. Carts are already rolling. Horses stamp and snort. Somewhere a baker's oven gives off a warm, yeasty scent that feels almost cruel, because you are not the one buying bread, or you inhale anyway. Smelling is free for now, although New York would surely charge for it if it could. You search for wages in fragments. A day's work unloading goods, a few hours scrubbing floors, a bundle of shirts to wash, a sack of coal to carry, a basket of apples to sell, a stack of fabric to stitch until your fingers sting. Poverty does not usually offer one clean occupation. It offers a basket of maybes, each one too small, and asks you to build a life out of them. Here is one solid piece of history beneath your tired shoes. Many poor New Yorkers in the 19th century survived through irregular labour, piecework, domestic service. Street vending and casual dock work rather than steady employment. A job might last a day a week, or only until the stronger person behind you gets noticed first. Security is not the mood of the century down here. The mood is come back tomorrow, which is less a promise than a shrug wearing a hat. You pass men gathered near the docks, waiting to be chosen for loading and hauling. They stand with hands in pockets, shoulders hunched, eyes alert. Nobody wants to seem desperate, though everyone is. A foreman appears and the group tightens. He points. One man steps forward. Another. Not you, not yet. The rejected turn away with practiced faces. Pride must be preserved, even when the stomach is filing a very formal complaint. If you're a woman or simply someone pushed toward the work that respectable society pretends is natural, and therefore underpaid, you may carry laundry. Wet cloth is astonishingly heavy. You take in washing from households with better rooms, better windows, and better opinions of themselves. You scrub collars, cuffs, sheets, and underclothes in water that reddens your hands. Lye bites at cracked skin, steam dampens your hair, soap, sweat, and cold water become the perfume of your labour. If you sew, the work follows you home and sits at the table like another demanding relative. Shirts, vests, trousers, artificial flowers, collars, caps, gloves. You stitch by daylight, then by lamplight, then by the memory of light when oil runs low. Payment comes by the piece, which means the faster you work, the faster you discover it still is not enough. A needle can look delicate until it becomes an instrument for turning eyesight into rent. One odd little detail from the working city: some street sellers use distinctive cries so recognizable that New Yorkers could identify goods by sound before seeing the vendor. Hot corn oysters, rags, matches, old clothes, and pies each had their own voice in the street chorus. Imagine lying half awake in your crowded room and knowing from a cry below where the temptation has arrived in the form of something warm, cheap, and probably questionable. The city advertises itself straight through your window. You try your luck with small selling, perhaps apples, perhaps matches, perhaps newspapers. You stand at a corner where foot traffic is heavy, calling out until your throat dries. Some people pass without seeing you. Some glance, calculate refuse. A few buy, and each coin lands in your palm with a tiny bright weight. You learn quickly where police are strict, where shopkeepers resent competition, where children might steal from your basket, and where a kindly cook may trade scraps for news. Discussion among researchers continues over how much poor families depended on women's and children's earnings, especially in the decades before stronger labour regulations. You do not need a university debate to understand the answer in your own bones. Every possible earner matters. A child selling papers, a mother sewing late, a father hauling crates, a grandmother taking in mending, a boarder paying a few coins for floor space. Survival is not individual here. It is a household machine patched together and always in danger of losing a wheel. By mid-morning the city grows louder. Iron strikes stone. Hooves slap mud. Wheels grind. Men shout prices, curses directions. A bell rings somewhere. Another answers. You carry a basket through streets that seem to change character block by block. A fine coat brushes past you and does not slow. A clerk with ink on his fingers hurries toward an office. A maid in a clean apron moves quickly, eyes lowered. Everyone is serving someone, selling something, or trying not to be noticed. When you find work, relief comes first, then the cost of it. A woman hires you to scrub steps. The stone is cold under your knees. Your hands push the brush back and forth until the motion becomes almost soothing if you ignore the pain. Dirty water runs into the gutter. People step around you or over you as if you're a part of the street, perhaps for the hour you are. Later you carry coal upstairs for a few coins. Each basket drags at your arms. Coal dust settles into the lines of your palms and under your nails. It smudges your face, your cuffs, your breath. By the third trip, your legs tremble. By the fifth, you begin bargaining silently with your own body. Just one more, then another, because rent does not accept complaints as payment. The city's wealth is visible everywhere, which makes poverty sharper. You glimpse shop windows with fabrics soft as cream silver spoons, polished boots, oranges stacked like captured suns. You imagine touching them. You do not. Your reflection in the glass looks narrow and temporary, as if the city might erase you with one sleeve. Still, you stand there for a heartbeat. Wanting is human. Looking is still free, though. Again, New York's probably working on that. At noon, if you have food, you eat it quickly. Bread, maybe. A bit of cheese if fortune has been unusually dramatic. Tea, if someone has stretched leaves through several lives already. You sit on a step or lean against a wall. The bread is dry, but your mouth is grateful. Around you, other workers eat in the same guarded way, one eye on their meal and one on the chance of another task. The day lengthens. Your body becomes a ledger of labour. Shoulders record carrying, fingers record sewing, knees record scrubbing, lungs record smoke, feet record every stone between the docks, the street corner, the laundry yard, and the tenement stairs. Poverty writes itself into posture. It teaches you to bend, lift, hurry, wait, endure. And yet there are small victories. A coin earned honestly or nearly honestly. A promise of work tomorrow. A leftover crust wrapped in cloth. A neighbour who knows of a place needing help. A foreman who finally points at you. These moments do not rescue you, not exactly. They keep you in motion. They are crumbs on a path through a city that rarely bothers to mark the way. As evening approaches, you return with aching hands and the smell of the day soaked into your clothes. The room waits above, warm, dim, and crowded. The table will become a workplace again. The stove will be coaxed. The water will be measured. Someone will ask how much you made, and you will answer with the careful tone of a person reporting weather that may yet turn worse. You climb the stairs slowly, each step a reminder that work has not ended. It has only changed rooms. The room shifts before the city fully brightens, and the children are awake as if sleep has only brushed past them. They rise from under coats, shawls, and shared blankets, small faces pale in the thin light. One child rubs soot from an eyelid. Another scratches at a bite on the wrist. The youngest sits blinking at nothing, hair standing up in soft, wild wisps, like a philosopher who has just discovered rent. You watch them begin their day without the slow gentleness childhood is supposed to have. There is no nursery hush here, no separate world of toys and clean floors. The street waits below, and the street is teacher, playground, employer, danger, and stage. Children in this part of New York grow into usefulness quickly. Some fetch water, some carry messages, some sell matches, flowers, newspapers. Fruit, or whatever small thing an adult has trusted them to move from basket to customer. Some beg, some steal, many do a little of several things because poverty does not care about neat job titles. A well-known fact from the period sits quietly behind their movement. Child labour was common in 19th century American cities long before strong child protection laws reshaped daily life. Poor children worked in streets, homes, workshops, factories, and shops, often contributing essential money to the household. Childhood as a protected season of innocence belonged more easily to families with saving servants and rooms where beds did not have to become tables by morning. You follow a boy down the stairs. His coat is too large at the shoulders and too short at the wrists, which suggests it has lived several lives before choosing him. He carries newspapers under one arm, damp from fog and handling. Outside, the morning noise wraps around him. He slips into it with practiced ease, calling headlines in a voice bigger than his body. He knows which corners are good, which gentlemen may buy, which ones wave him away, and which older boys might take his papers if he looks too soft. Nearby, a girl carries a tin pail. Her boots are mismatched. She walks with the serious concentration of someone performing an errand that matters. Perhaps she is fetching beer for an adult, or milk if the family is lucky, or water because the room has already emptied its bucket. She pauses near a gutter, where a scrap of ribbon lies in the mud. For 1 second her face changes. She wants it. Then she sees how soiled it is and walks on. Practicality wins again, rude little creature. A curious detail from street life children, sometimes invented games from whatever the city discarded. Hoops, bones, bottle caps, broken crockery, bits of wood or chalk marks on pavement. A ruined object could become treasure if imagination got to it before the ragpicker did. So even here, where the air smells of coal smoke and horse droppings, play survives in scraps. A hoop rolling down a street can become a parade. A chalked square can become a kingdom. A puddle can become an ocean, though admittedly an ocean one should not touch with bare skin if avoidable. You see a cluster of children in an alley playing between errands. Their laughter rises and vanishes quick as birds. One stands guard while the others toss small stones at a mark. Another child makes a doll from bundled cloth, tying a thread around the middle to suggest a waist. There is tenderness in the gesture, a tiny act of creation against all this breaking down. The doll has no face, but perhaps that is wise. Faces are expensive emotionally. The city watches children unevenly. Reformers worry over them. Police chase them. Employers use them. Parents rely on them. Charities try to save them, though saving often comes with lectures wrapped tightly around the bread. The children themselves learn to read adults as if adults are weather. They know the warning signs of anger, pity, drunkenness, generosity, and distraction. They know when to smile, when to vanish, when to look hungry, and when hunger looks too much like weakness. Researchers still disagree about whether poor urban children were mainly victims of the 19th century city or active makers of their own street culture. You feel the answer sliding between both. They are vulnerable, terribly so, but not passive. They bargain, they perform, they protect siblings. They map alleys, cellars, markets, missions, churches, and corners with a precision no official guidebook could match. Their independence is impressive and also heartbreaking, which is a rather rude combination for bedtime, but history rarely checks the mood lighting. You trail a small group toward a market. The smell arrives first: fish, onions, damp, straw bruised, fruit, smoke, meat, and mud. Children hover near stalls, watching for fallen items, discarded leaves, a cracked egg, a merchant in a forgiving mood. One boy distracts with chatter, while another studies the edge of a basket. You cannot quite tell whether theft is about to happen, or whether hunger is simply rehearsing possibilities. A woman at a stall tosses a bruised apple toward a girl. The child catches it against her chest and looks astonished for half a breath before running. Generosity in these streets often happens quickly, almost secretly, as if kindness might be taxed if left in public view too long. The girl disappears through legs and wheels, apple hidden in her sleeve. You return toward the tenement and notice a child sitting on a stoop holding a baby almost as large as herself. She rocks gently, eyes half closed. She may be 7, she may be 10. Poverty blurs age. Responsibility settles on small shoulders and makes them look older from a distance until they smile and you remember they still have baby teeth. The infant fusses. The girl murmurs something soft. Perhaps a song, perhaps nonsense. It works. The baby quiets. Inside, older children help with piecework. Tiny fingers can pull thread-sort buttons, fold paper strip tobacco, carry finished bundles. Their work is praised as helpful, necessary, even character building by people who are not the ones squinting over it in bad light. At the table, a boy nods with sleep while his hands keep moving. His mother taps the wood lightly, not cruelly. Just enough to bring him back. The rent will not wait for him to grow. School exists, of course, but school competes with hunger. Some children attend irregularly. Some avoid it. Some are sent to charity schools where discipline can be strict and the lessons mix reading with moral instruction. A clean soul, reformers often believe, may lead to a clean life. The trouble is that soap, shoes and supper also help, and those are less easily preached into existence. In the afternoon, the street grows golden for a moment even here. Sunlight catches dust in the air. A group of children chase one another past a cart, shrieking with joy, so pure it seems to ignore the neighbourhood entirely. One boy leaps a puddle and lands badly, splashing filth up his trousers. He laughs first. Then he remembers the washing and winces. Even happiness has consequences. You feel the day turning, and with it the children's faces change. The bold morning sellers become tired. The errand runners slow. The baby minders shift hips. The small beggars count coins or crumbs. Some will return with money, some with nothing, some with trouble they must explain. At doorways, mothers and fathers look for them with guarded eyes. The city can take a child quickly. Through illness, accident, arrest, hunger, or simple disappearance into the crowd. Yet they come back, many of them carrying newspapers, unsold apples, bruised ribbons, rescued from mud stories, sharpened into jokes. They climb stairs faster than adults because knees are still merciful at that age. They spill into rooms hungry, loud, alive. Annoying, yes. Precious, yes. Both truths sit together on the same broken chair. As night begins to lower over the street, you hear a child humming near the window. The tune is thin and repetitive but soothing in its way. Below, cartwheels grind through muck. Above, someone argues softly. Beside you, small hands fold cloth past thread, steal a crust pat a baby's back. Childhood has not vanished here. It has been forced to work, negotiate, dodge, and endure. Still, in the dim amber lamplight, it keeps a stubborn little corner for play. By the time evening settles into the narrow streets, your stomach has already begun its quiet protest. It does not shout. It has learned better. Hunger here is patient, persistent, and strangely polite, as if it knows it will be heard eventually without raising its voice. You return to the room with the others, carrying what you have managed to gather. Whether coins, scraps, or simply the intention to eat, the table becomes the centre of attention again. Not a grand table, not even a steady one, but a place where food appears however modestly and is shared with care that borders on strategy. Meals are less about satisfaction and more about distribution. Who worked the longest? Who is ill? Who is youngest? Who brought in something extra today? Every bite carries a small calculation. You sit watching as the evening meal takes shape. A pot simmers on the stove, its contents uncertain but promising warmth. The smell rises slowly. Thin broth perhaps, with a few vegetables stretched far beyond their original purpose. A piece of salt pork if fortune has been unusually generous. More often it is cabbage, potatoes, onions, and whatever else can be coaxed into becoming something like sustenance. Bread's present, though not always fresh. Stale loaves are common, sometimes soaked to soften them, sometimes eaten as they are with determined chewing. You take a piece and hold it for a moment. It is dry but solid, reliable. Bread may not comfort the soul, but it keeps the body negotiating with tomorrow. One widely accepted detail from this era is that poor urban dieters were often repetitive and lacking in variety, relying heavily on bread, potatoes, and inexpensive staples. Meat was occasional. Fresh produce depended on season and luck. Nutrition as a science had not yet fully entered daily conversation, and survival did not leave much room for balanced planning. You eat what you can afford, and you are grateful if it does not make you ill. The broth is ladled into cups or bowls, whatever is available. You sip carefully. It is hot, which feels like kindness. The flavour is faint, but it carries enough salt to wake your mouth. You notice how slowly everyone eats, stretching the moment, allowing warmth to linger. There is a rhythm to it. Sip, pause, breathe, sip again. No one rushes unless they're very young or very tired. There is something quietly comforting about tea even here. Weak tea often reused leaves, but still tea. It warms the hands and gives the illusion of fullness. Some families treat tea as a small ritual, a pause in the day that feels almost civilized. A cup passed from hand to hand becomes more than liquid. It becomes a shared moment of calm. A curious detail from everyday life, tea drinking became widespread among working-class families in the 19th century, not only for comfort, but sometimes because boiling water for tea could make it safer to consume than plain water. It is a small example of adaptation turning necessity into habit, and habit into something that feels almost like choice. You notice how conversation changes during meals. The day is reviewed in fragments. A job found, a job lost, a rumour heard, a neighbour mentioned. Voices are softer now, less urgent. Even complaints lose some of their sharpness when spoken over warm food. There is a kind of temporary truce between people and their troubles negotiated through shared eating. Still, the tension never fully disappears. You can feel it in the way portions are watched, in the quick glance when someone takes a slightly larger piece, in the subtle counting of how much remains. No one wants to accuse. No one wants to be accused. Hunger makes everyone careful. Questions linger in the minds of those who study this period about how families manage to maintain any sense of dignity and routine under such conditions. Watching this meal, you begin to understand that dignity is not a grand gesture here. It is found in small acts. Passing the last piece of bread to someone else. thanking the cook even when the meal is thin, sitting up straight at the table, even when the chair wobbles. These are quiet declarations that poverty has not taken everything. After the meal, the table does not rest. It becomes a workspace again. Scraps are cleared, bowls are wiped. The pot is set aside for later because nothing is wasted if it can possibly be saved. Even the smallest leftover may become tomorrow's beginning. You feel the weight of the day in your body. Your hands ache, your shoulders pull downward. Your eyes sting from smoke and strain. But there is also a strange sense of completion. You've eaten. Not well, not fully, but enough to continue. In this place, enough is often the closest thing to abundance. The room grows quieter as the evening deepens. A child leans against a parent half asleep. Someone hums softly a tune without urgency. Outside, the street noise fades slightly, though it never disappears entirely. The city does not sleep in the way quieter places do. It shifts, it mutters, it breathes. You take another sip of tea now lukewarm. It still comforts. Around you, the others settle into their own small spaces. The stove glows faintly. Shadows stretch along the walls. The air remains heavy, but it feels less oppressive, now softened by shared presence. Food here is never just food. It is effort, negotiation, memory, and hope combined into something that fits in a cup or on a plate. It is a reminder that survival is built one meal at a time, each one uncertain, each one necessary. As you set your cup down, you realize that tomorrow will begin the same way. Hunger will return, work will be sought, water will be carried, but for now, in this dim room with the faint warmth of tea in your hands and the quiet company of others around you, there is a moment of stillness. And sometimes that is enough. Night does not cure the room, it only dims it, gently dims it. You lie close to the wall, with the taste of weak tea still faintly in your mouth, and listen as the building breathes around you. Someone coughs above, someone coughs below, someone in the hallway mutters through sleep or fever, and the sound travels through the boards as if the house itself has a sore throat. The stove has fallen low, so the room cools slowly damp, returning to the bedding, to the sleeves, to the corners where shadows gather like tired guests. Illness lives easily in places like this. It does not need an invitation, only closeness. There's bad air, poor drainage, hunger, wet clothing, and bodies too worn down to resist. You learn to recognize the sounds, the dry cough, the wet cough, the long silence after a cough that makes everyone pause, the restless shifting of a child too hot under the blanket, the thin voice asking for water when the bucket is almost empty. You turn your head and see the youngest child sleeping near the stove, cheeks flushed. A mother touches the child's forehead with the back of her hand, then says nothing. Silence is sometimes how fear enters a room without frightening the others too quickly. It is worth remembering one plain historical truth: 19th century New York suffered repeated outbreaks of diseases such as cholera, typhus, tuberculosis, and smallpox, and overcrowded poor districts were especially vulnerable. Before modern antibiotics, before broad vaccination programs were reliable and common, before clean water and sanitation reached the city more fully, sickness could move through a tenement with dreadful ease. A cough was not just a cough, a stomach pain was not just a stomach pain. A fever could rearrange a family by morning. The words people use for sickness are different now. They speak of bad air miasma, weakness, contagion, constitution, providence, damp filth, and misfortune. Some explanations are close to the truth. Some wander off wearing a very confident hat. Germ theory will gain wider acceptance later in the century, but in your room knowledge arrives unevenly mixed with rumour habit, and whatever the last doctor or neighbour insisted was true. You've already learned the small rituals of care. Keep the sick one warm unless the fever burns too high. Open the window unless the draught worsens the chill. Boil water if there is coal enough. Offer broth if there is broth. Rub the chest. Change the cloth. Pray. Wait. Make bargains with saints. God, fate, or your own exhausted body. Promise to be better, kinder, quieter, anything, if only the breathing in the corner will steady. A curious little belief from the period lingers in some households. People sometimes place sliced onions, vinegar camphor, or strong-smelling herbs near beds in the hope of purifying the air or warding off disease. It may not have worked the way they imagined, but in a room where fear has no medicine, scent itself can feel like action. You can almost understand it. Better an onion beside the bed than helpless hands in your lap. The room smells different when someone is ill. Sour sweat, damp cloth, smoke, old bedding, boiled water and a bitter note from whatever remedy has been borrowed or bought. A bottle sits on the shelf with a paper label curling at the edges. Maybe it is medicine. Maybe it is mostly alcohol and hope. Patent cures are everywhere in the 19th century, advertised with cheerful certainty and very selective honesty. According to the label, they treat nearly everything except disappointment, though someone is probably working on that. You hear footsteps on the stairs. A neighbour comes in without much ceremony carrying advice. She has seen fevers before. She says the child must be kept from cold air. Another neighbour later says air is exactly what the child needs. A third mentions a woman 3 streets over who knows how to make a poultice. Nobody agrees, but everyone wants to help, and this too is part of tenement medicine. Care Arrivas's argument: some who study urban poverty continue to ask whether high death rates in poor neighbourhoods were driven more by environmental conditions like contaminated water and overcrowding, or by deeper inequalities such as wages, nutrition, and housing policy. From where you sit holding a damp cloth in the lamplight, the separation feels artificial. Bad water enters a body made weak by hunger. Overcrowding spreads a disease brought home from work. Low wages keep people in rooms where air barely moves. Each cause holds hands with the next. A doctor may be called if there is money, often there is not. Charity doctors exist, dispensaries exist, hospitals exist. But all come with distance, delay, suspicion, and sometimes humiliation. Hospitals are not yet the reassuring places people later imagine. To many poor families, they are frightening institutions where you might go in and not return. Home, however cramped, still feels like a place where someone loves you enough to watch your breathing. You sit beside the child, or perhaps beside an older man whose cough has deepened over months. Tuberculosis, often called consumption, has a terrible poetry to its name, as if the illness politely describes what it does. It consumes strength, flesh, time, wages, patience. A person fades in increments. The family adjusts around the fading. Work is missed. Rent trembles. Food is stretched further. Illness is never only medical here. It is economic, domestic, emotional and social, all packed into the same room like everything else. The night lengthens. Outside the city carries on. A cart rattles past. Somewhere laughter spills from a saloon and fades. The contrast feels almost indecent. Inside, a mother counts breaths. Outside, someone sings. That is the city for you, rude as ever, refusing to lower its voice just because your world has narrowed to a fevered forehead. You fetch water from the pail and feel how little remains. The cup is held to cracked lips. A swallow. Another. Some spills onto the blanket. No one scolds. The lamp flame trembles, making the walls seem to pulse. You are tired enough that the room blurs, but fear keeps you awake with a firm little finger under your chin. If the sickness is contagious, everyone knows and does not know. There is nowhere to send the healthy, nowhere to isolate the ill. A curtain may be hung, a bed may be shifted. A child may be told not to go near the corner, which is like telling smoke not to drift. The room is too small for separation. Love itself becomes a risk because care requires nearness. Yet tenderness persists. A hand smooths hair from a hot forehead. A lullaby is murmured nearly soundless. Someone gives up a portion of blanket. Someone else goes down into the cold to ask for coal or credit or help. The poor are often accused by reformers of disorder, but in moments like this you see an order of another kind, not tidy, not silent, not respectable in the parlour rents, but devoted, practical and deeply human. Near dawn the fever changes. Maybe it breaks, maybe it does not. The child sleeps more quietly for a while and the room exhales. Nobody celebrates too soon. Poverty teaches caution even in relief. Still shoulders drop. The mother closes her eyes without lying down. You notice the grey light returning to the window thin as watered milk. The day will demand work again, even from those who have not slept. Rent does not pause for illness. Employers do not always care about fever. A missed day means missed coins, and missed coins may mean lost shelter. So the sick room becomes a workroom again by necessity. Cloth will be folded, needles lifted, water carried. The patient will rest in the corner while life resumes around them. Because life cannot afford a separate chamber for suffering. You rise slowly, stiff from sitting. The room smells of smoke, damp, and spent fear. Outside, the first street cries begin distant and rough. Another day has arrived, not clean, not merciful, but arrived all the same. You look at the sleeping child, at the nearly empty pail at the table, waiting for work, and you understand that surviving poverty means surviving not one crisis, but many quiet ones layered together until they feel like ordinary morning. By the time the fever quiets, the room has used up nearly everything it can spare. Coal sits low in the scuttle. The water pail is light. The bread has become a memory with crumbs. Someone has missed work to sit beside the sick child, and now the rent waits in the future with its hand out, patient and unpleasant. So you step into the morning carrying a different kind of hunger, not only for food, but for help. Help exists in 19th century New York, but it rarely arrives without questions. Charity has doors and doors have keepers. Some are kind, some are tired. Some seem to believe that poverty is a personal habit like biting nails, only less charming. You wrap your shawl tighter and walk toward a mission church office, relief society or charitable kitchen where bread, cold medicine, or a small coin might be given if your need is judged worthy enough. The streets are wet from overnight rain. Mud grips your shoes. A cart rolls past, splashing brown water against a wall, already resigned to insult. Around you people move with that same urgent slowness you know too well, the paces of bodies conserving strength while chasing necessity. A woman ahead carries a baby under her coat. An old man with a cane pauses at every curb as if negotiating with the stones. One established fact of the period is that New York's poor often relied on a mix of private charities, religious missions, mutual aid groups, almshouses, dispensaries, and informal neighborhood help. Public welfare existed, but it was limited, and often tangled with suspicion. The city might feed you shelter, or treat you, but first it wanted to know what kind of poor person you were. Deserving, undeserving, sober, idle, respectable, fallen. Labels were handed out almost as quickly as bread. At the mission doorway, a line is already formed. You join it. No one speaks much at first. People in lines for charity have a particular stillness. It is not peace, it is restraint. You stand close enough to smell damp wool, unwashed hair, tobacco, and the faint sweetness of a child sucking on a rag to stay quiet. Somewhere inside, a hymn is being practiced badly but sincerely. A woman near you mutters that the soup is thinner every week. Another says thin soup is better than no soup, which is true, and also annoying, as true things often are. A boy tries to peer through the doorway until his mother pulls him back. Pride stands in line, too invisible but present, making everyone look straighter than they feel. A peculiar little detail belongs here. Some charitable groups gave out tickets or tokens that could be exchanged for food, coal, or lodging, rather than handing over cash. The idea was to prevent waste or drink, though it also meant the poor were treated like people who could not be trusted with their own desperation. Imagine needing bread and receiving paperwork. Very efficient. If your main goal is to make hunger feel administratively supervised, when your turn comes, you step inside. The room is warmer than the street. Benches line the wall. A table stands near the front, behind which someone records names. Name, age, address, birthplace, occupation, religion, marital status, number of children. Each answer seems to reduce you into entries. You're not only hungry, you are data with cold hands. The person writing may be gentle, Let us allow them that. Not every reformer is cruel. Many are moved by real compassion, and some spend long hours among suffering they could have ignored. Yet even kindness here has a structure. You must explain yourself. You must prove needs without seeming shameless, prove virtue without sounding proud, prove helplessness without appearing lazy. It is a narrow bridge and you cross it while tired. Modern historians differ over whether 19th century charity softened urban poverty or reinforced the social control of the poor. Standing before the desk, you feel both possibilities breathing down your neck. The soup matters, the coal matters, the medicine matters, but so does the way help is given the inspection of your life, the warning tucked inside generosity. Relief can comfort the body while bruising dignity. You receive bread, perhaps, and a ticket for coal, maybe a small amount of broth in a tin pail, maybe advice. So there is almost always advice. Keep a cleaner home, avoid drink, attend services, send the children to school, work steadily, save money. Some of it is sensible, some of it floats above your life like a decorative balloon. Save money, how charming. Shall you save the money before or after buying bread with the money you do not have? From the mission, you may be directed toward an almshouse if your need is deeper. The word itself carries a chill. Almshouses are meant for the destitute, the elderly poor, the disabled, the abandoned, the sick without family, and others the city cannot easily fit elsewhere. They can provide shelter and food, but they also carry stigma. To enter one may feel like admitting that your last offences have failed. You pass a building where a charity doctor sees patients. The waiting room is crowded. A woman holds a bandaged hand. A child sleeps upright against a wall. A man coughs into a cloth and looks away from everyone. The air smells of vinegar, damp clothing old wood, and fear trying to behave. Medicine here is a mercy, but it is also a queue. You wait because everyone waits. Pain takes a number. There are other forms of help, less official and often more immediate. A neighbour lends coal. A church member brings broth. A mutual aid society formed by immigrants offers burial support, sickness benefits, or small relief funds. These associations matter deeply. They are built from shared language, shared faith, shared homeland, shared trade, or simply shared vulnerability. They do not erase poverty, but they make it less lonely. You remember the sick child in the room, the mother's sleepless face, the nearly empty stove? The bread in your hand feels heavier than bread should. It is food, yes, but also proof that you stood in line and answered questions. You tuck it close beneath your shawl to keep it dry. Outside the day has brightened. Sunlight touches the upper windows of taller buildings, leaving the street below in cool shade. A church bell rings. A vendor calls out something hot. For a moment the sounds mingle strangely with the memory of the mission hymn, the scratching pen, the quiet shame of waiting. Charity is not simpled here. It saves and judges. It feeds and measures. It opens doors and reminds you who owns the key. But in the world you inhabit, simple things are rare. You learn to accept help without letting it define you completely. You learn to nod through lectures, gather what is useful, and return to those who need you. By afternoon you climb the stairs again with bread broth and perhaps coal enough to warm the evening. The room receives these things with a softness that almost hurts. A child stirs. The mother looks up and gratitude passes across her face before exhaustion covers it again. You set the food on the table. No one speaks loudly. Relief does not need volume. The stove will be lit. The broth will be warmed. The bread will be divided. Outside the city continues judging, trading, shouting and reforming itself in speeches. Inside for now there is something to eat, and that is its own quiet sermon. You begin to notice how many languages live inside these walls. At first it all sounded like noise, a blur of unfamiliar syllables, quick exchanges, laughter that rose and fell in patterns you could not follow. But as days pass, your ear adjusts. You start to separate voices: Irish lilt, German firmness, Yiddish warmth, Italian rhythm, the steady tones of black New Yorkers whose families have known this city far longer than most. Each voice carries a different history, and yet all of them share these same narrow streets. The hallway outside your room becomes a kind of living map. Doors open and close, revealing fragments of other worlds. A pot of cabbage here, sausages there, garlic and onions drifting from another room. Bread shaped differently. Prayers spoken differently. Children scolded in words you do not understand but somehow still recognize. One firmly grounded historical reality is that 19th century New York was transformed by waves of immigration, especially from Ireland and Germany, in the mid-century, followed later by arrivals from Italy, Eastern Europe and China. These communities often settled close together in crowded districts, not always by choice, but because rents were low and familiarity offered some protection. Language, faith and shared customs became tools for survival. You pass a doorway where a woman kneads dough with strong practiced hands. She hums a tune from somewhere across the ocean. Next door, a man sharpens tools while speaking in a language that rolls like water over stones. Further down, a family gathers around a small table, their voices rising and falling in a cadence that feels almost musical, even when you cannot understand a single word. There is comfort in this closeness, but also tension. Not everyone trusts everyone else. Differences can sharpen into suspicion, especially when work is scarce and landlords are eager to raise rents whenever possible. Rumours travel quickly, so do misunderstandings. A glance can be misread, a word can be taken the wrong way, and in streets already tight with pressure, small conflicts can grow larger than they deserve. A small lesser-known detail adds texture to this world. Many immigrant communities formed their own informal networks for finding jobs, housing, and support. A newly arrived person might be guided by someone from the same village or parish, creating chains of migration that shaped entire neighborhoods. You're rarely alone here, even if you feel it. Someone nearby knows someone who has seen what you're going through. You begin to recognize faces. The Irish woman who carries water at dawn. The German baker who sometimes lets a loaf go a little stale before lowering the price. The Jewish tailor who works late into the night, his window glowing like a small lantern in the darkness. The black dock worker who walks with steady confidence, his presence both familiar and quietly resilient in a city that does not always treat him fairly. Children cross these boundaries more easily than adults. They play together in the street, borrowing words, inventing games, arguing, laughing, forgetting differences, until an older voice calls them back to their proper place. You hear a child switch languages mid-sentence as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Perhaps it is. Still, questions remain among those who study this era about how much these diverse communities blended together versus remaining separate within the same crowded spaces. Walking these streets, you sense both truths at once. There is mingling, borrowing, sharing. And there are invisible lines drawn by habit, fear, and the need to hold on to something familiar in an unfamiliar city. You pass a small shop where signs are written in a language you cannot read. Inside the shelves hold goods from far away. Spices, fabrics, tools, foods that carry the memory of another place. Customers speak softly as if stepping into a pocket of home. For a moment, the city outside fades, replaced by something warmer, more recognizable. Back in your building, a disagreement breaks out in the hallway. Voices rise, words clash. You cannot follow the argument, but the tone is clear enough. Someone feels cheated, someone feels accused. Others gather watching, waiting to see if it will settle or spread. Eventually it quiets. It usually does. People here cannot afford long feuds. There is too much else to manage. You return to your room and sit for a moment listening. The sounds of the building form a kind of rhythm now. Footsteps, voices, doors, laughter, crying, the occasional burst of music. It is chaotic but not random. There is a pattern to it, like waves against a shore, each one different, but all part of the same restless motion. You realize that survival here is not only about work, food and shelter. It is also about learning to live among others who are different from you, finding ways to coexist in spaces that offer no room for distance. It is about patience, adaptation, and the quiet art of not taking every slight personally. At night, the building settles again, lamps flicker, conversations soften. Somewhere someone sings a lullaby in a language that feels both foreign and familiar at the same time. The tune drifts through the walls, gentle and steady. You close your eyes and listen. The words do not matter. The feeling does. In a city that can be harsh, loud and unforgiving, these small moments of shared humanity become something precious, not grand, not permanent, but enough to remind you that even here among the crowded rooms and narrow streets, people are still finding ways to belong. After supper, the city changes its voice. Daytime New York is all wheels, wages, errands, and bargaining. Nighttime New York is slower but not quieter, not in any honest sense. It hums through walls, leaks through windows, climbs stairwells, and settles around your head while you try to sleep. The room darkens. The stove gives off its last stubborn heat. A lamp burns low, its flame small and golden, making every face look older and softer at once. Outside, the street remains awake. Boots pass over the wet stones. A wagon creaks under some late load. Somewhere nearby, a saloon door opens and a burst of warmth escapes with laughter song and the sharp smell of beer. Then the door shuts and the street exhales again. You lie still listening because sleep in the slums is rarely a clean fall into silence. It's more like drifting in a crowded harbour, bumping gently against other people's noises. One reliable piece of historical context belongs to this night air. Saloons were major social centres in 19th century working-class New York, especially for immigrant men, offering warmth, drink news, political connections and companionship. Reformers often condemned them, sometimes for good reasons, but the saloon also served as a kind of clubhouse for people who had no parlour, no office, and no private place to gather. Not exactly a wellness retreat, but the century did what it could. You hear a fiddle begin. Thin at first, then stronger, joined by a boot-tapping time. The tune rises through the alley and slips beneath your door. Someone in the room mutters that it's too late. Someone else smiles without opening their eyes. Music has a way of entering poor rooms without asking rent. The melody is lively, too lively for your tired bones, but there is comfort in it. It proves that the day has not swallowed everyone whole. From another building comes an argument muffled but intense. A woman's voice, then a man's, then a thud that may be a chair, a door or history, being unpleasant again. The room goes still. Everyone listens without admitting they are listening. Then the voice is lower. A baby cries. Life resumes its uncomfortable shape, in close quarters. Other people's troubles arrive as sound before they become gossip. There is a peculiar note in the night chorus. Two street vendors sometimes keep working after dark, selling hot foods, fruit, coffee, or cheap treats to labourers, drinkers, and wanderers. The cries are different at night, rougher, more intimate. A call for hot corn might drift through fog like a spell. A person half asleep can feel both tempted and assaulted. Hunger, of course, wakes easily. It is a light sleeper. You turn on your side. The floor is hard beneath the bedding. The air smells of damp cloth, coal smoke, old food, and the faint bitter odour of the lamp. A child breathes beside you in soft little whistles. Above someone moves furniture, or perhaps just owns very loud feet. Below, a door opens and closes repeatedly each time, sending a draft up the stairs. You begin to understand that sleep here is not private either. It must share space with every sound in the building. People who study urban life still disagree about whether nighttime street culture in poor neighbourhoods should be seen mostly as disorder, or as a vital social world created by people shut out of respectable spaces. From where you lie, the answer feels complicated and also very noisy. There is danger outside. There is drunkenness, theft police patrols, and men looking for fights because their pride has nowhere useful to go. But there is also laughter. Music, courtship, friendship, bargaining and relief. Night gives the poor a little room to exist beyond labour. The patrolman passes eventually, you know from the rhythm of the steps, deliberate and heavy. Perhaps he carries a lantern, perhaps a club. His presence may comfort some and frighten others. Police in these streets are not abstract guardians. They are men with tempers, favourites, prejudices and orders. Children scatter when they see him. Street sellers lower their voices. Men outside the saloon straighten or slip away depending on what sort of evening they have been having. At the window, if you lift your head, you see little. The glass is cloudy, the view narrow. Across the gap, another window glows. A woman sits there, sewing, her shoulders bent, still working after dark. Her lamp makes a halo around her hands. For a moment it looks peaceful, almost holy, until you remember that she is probably finishing piecework because morning will come with demands. Even beauty here has tired eyes. A church bell sounds somewhere in the distance. Not close, not commanding, just a slow note travelling over roofs. It gives the night a shape. You imagine the city from above, though you have never seen it that way. The harbour black and restless, the docks lined with masts, the poor wards crowded and smoky wealthier streets, quieter and better lit, all of it held together by roads, hunger, ambition and smoke. Then laughter erupts below, wild and bright. Someone is telling a story. You cannot hear all of it, only the rhythm. A pause, then a roar. Another pause, then louder laughter. For a moment you smile. Humour survives here because it must. Without it, the whole arrangement would become unbearable by Tuesday. Gentle sarcasm is not a modern invention. The poor have always known how to laugh at misery, just enough to keep it from claiming the entire room. A door opens in the hallway. Someone steps carefully around sleepers. Lodgers may come in late from work, from drink, from searching for work, from failing to find any. A body settles near the wall. The floor creaks, fabric rustles. Someone whispers an apology. Someone else tells them to hush. Then the darkness absorbs them too. You feel yourself drifting, but the city keeps tugging you back. A horse stumbles outside, iron shoes scraping stone. A man coughs hard enough to wake the baby. The baby whimpers, then quiets after a soft murmur. The saloon music slows. The fiddle becomes gentler, almost sweet. Perhaps the player is tired. Perhaps the drinkers are. Perhaps even 5 points, that restless old maid has begun to nod. The night air cools. Damp slides under the door and into your bones. You pull the blanket higher. It smells of smoke and many bodies, but it is warmth. Nearby someone murmurs in sleep in a language you do not know. Another person answers without waking. The building becomes a vessel of half-dreams all packed together, floating through the dark. You think of the children in the street, the mission line, the fever, the weak tea, the many voices behind many doors. All of it continues at night, softened but not erased. Poverty does not sleep deeply. It dozes with one ear open. Still there is a strange tenderness in the hour before full quiet. The music fades. The footsteps thin. The last vendor calls once faintly, then no more. For a little while the city seems to breathe more slowly. You let your own breath follow it in and out, shallow but steady. The darkness holds the room holds its sleepers, and beyond the wall, the street waits under a thin veil of mist, ready to wake again with the first wheels. Morning brings politics down to street level, where it smells less like polished speeches and more like wet wool, tobacco, beer, coal smoke, and the nervous sweat of people who need favours. You step outside after a poor sleep, still carrying the sounds of last night's fiddle in your bones, and find the neighbourhood already arranging itself around power. Power here does not always wear a fine coat. Sometimes it leans against a lamppost, knows every landlord by name, and remembers who needs work. Sometimes it sits in the back room of a saloon beneath a framed print of a politician with impressive whiskers. Sometimes it walks past in a patrolman's boots, slow enough to be noticed, heavy enough to be understood. You learn quickly that survival in the ward depends not only on wages and luck, but on relationships. Who knows you? Who will speak for you? Who will ignore an offence? Who will find you a coal ticket, a job on an election week, a lawyer after an arrest, a place in line, or a warning before trouble arrives? The city may seem chaotic from a distance, but down here it has channels, loyalties, and prices. A basic historical anchor matters here. 19th century New York politics was strongly shaped by ward organisations and political machines, especially Tammany Hall, which built support among many immigrant and working-class voters by offering practical help in exchange for loyalty. Reformers called it corruption, and often they had evidence. Poor families sometimes called it the only office that answered quickly. You pass a saloon where men are already gathered even though the morning is young. The door is open just enough to show smoke a dark counter and a cluster of voices. A ward worker is inside not making a grand speech but listening. That is part of the skill. He hears whose husband is out of work, whose son got into trouble, whose rent is overdue, whose cousin has just arrived from Ireland and needs a bed. Information is currency. Sympathy is investment. A favour today may become a vote later. You stand near the doorway pretending not to listen too closely, which of course means listening very closely. A man complains that the police took his brother after a fight. Another says the charge can be softened if the right person speaks to the right sergeant. A woman appears with a note folded into her glove asking about coal. The wardman takes it, nods and says he will see, not promise. See, the language of power prefers soft edges. There is an odd but telling election detail from this world. Before secret ballots became standard, voting could be public, noisy and deeply social, with parties printing their own tickets and workers sometimes escorting men to the polls. Privacy in voting, like privacy in housing, was not always guaranteed. Imagine trying to make an independent political choice while half the neighbourhood watches. Very relaxing. Practically a spa day for democracy. You keep walking and see a policeman talking with a shopkeeper. His uniform gives him authority, but his faces gives him individuality, which is more complicated. He may be fair, he may be cruel, he may be hungry for a bribe, he may simply be tired. Patrolmen in poor neighbourhoods often know local characters. Trouble spots, saloons, lodging houses and street sellers. They can protect, harass, overlook or punish. Much depends on mood orders, prejudice, and whether someone important has whispered your name. Children spot him first. They scatter from a corner where they have been playing, selling, or doing something in between. One boy tucks a stolen apple under his coat with such elegance that you almost admire the technique. The policeman sees or does not see. His eyes move on. Perhaps today is not Apple Day. Disagreement persists among scholars over whether political machines primarily exploited poor voters or provided necessary aid in a city that offered too few formal supports. You feel the pull of both ideas. A machine can be greedy and still useful. A boss can manipulate suffering and still send coal in winter. Corruption is easier to condemn from a warm office than from a room where the stove is cold and a child is coughing. You hear talk of an upcoming election. Men discuss candidates as if discussing whether that may break a roof. One candidate promises reform, another promises jobs, a third promises to protect the neighbourhood from people who do not understand it. Promises are plentiful. Bread is less so. The poor learn to value what can be touched. A turkey at Christmas, a rent delay, a position sweeping streets, a lawyer who appears when your brother is arrested. Ideals matter, yes, but supper is persuasive. In the afternoon you witness a small confrontation. A pushcart seller has set up too near a shop front. The shopkeeper complains. Patrolman approaches. The seller argues softly, hands raised, voice careful. Too much resistance could mean a fine confiscation or worse. Too little could mean losing the day's income. People gather because public trouble is awful and irresistible. Finally, another man known locally steps in. Words are exchanged. The policeman shrugs. The cart moves a few yards. The crowd dissolves. There. Politics, law and survival all in one small street performance. No speeches, no marble halls. Just a cart, a complaint, a uniform, a local mediator, and the daily negotiation of who may stand where. You return toward the tenement and find the hallway buzzing with news. Someone's cousin has been released. Someone else has been promised work paving a street. A widow has received coal from a church society, though another woman insists it came through a ward contact. The origins of help become part of its power. Whoever provides relief earns memory, and memory becomes loyalty. At night, the saloon fills again. This time, politics blends with music and drink. A man makes a toast to a candidate. Another laughs and says the candidate would sell his grandmother if she came with voting papers. Nobody seems shocked. The city has trained them well. There is cynicism here, but not apathy. People care deeply because politics reaches into rent-policing employment, public works and charity. The ballot, however imperfect, is one more tool in a crowded survival kit. You sit near the edge of the room listening while nursing a cheap drink or perhaps just warming your hands around a cup. Smoke thickens beneath the ceiling. The talk drifts from elections to jobs, from jobs to arrests, from arrests to who married whom, because politics and gossip are close relatives in the ward. Both depend on knowing people's business. A ward worker claps a man on the shoulder and promises to remember him. That phrase hangs in the air. To be remembered can mean help. It can also mean obligation. You understand the bargain without signing anything. In the slums, independence is lovely in theory, but networks keep people alive. You may dislike owing favours. You may dislike even more what happens without them. Later, stepping back into the cool street, you hear the last sounds of debate behind you. The city lights blur in mist. Patrolman's lantern moves slowly at the corner. Somewhere upstairs, a child coughs. Somewhere nearby, a man is counting coins earned from the political errand he will not describe too loudly. You climb the tenement stairs with a new awareness. Poverty is not only endured in kitchens, workshops, and bread lines. It is navigated through systems of favour pressure, protection, and threat. You survive by knowing where power lives, when to ask, when to avoid, when to nod, when to vote, and when to keep your mouth beautifully strategically shut. The room greets you with its familiar damp warmth. The others ask what you heard. You tell them carefully, because information can be as useful as food. A job may be coming. A raid may be planned. A politician may visit. A landlord may be pressured. The city moves through rumour before it becomes fact. You lie down later listening to the footsteps in the hall and think of the river, the room, the children, the sickness, the charity desk, and now the ward boss with his soft promises. Each part of the city touches the next. Each hand may help or hold you down. Outside, a distant shout rises, then fades. Inside, you breathe slowly, learning that survival here is not just strength. It is reading the room, the street, the officer, the boss, and the silence between them. Morning light slips in weakly, brushing the edges of your sleeves, and you notice your clothes before anything else. It happens quietly, this awareness. A loose thread here, a worn cuff there, a seam that has held just long enough to get you through yesterday, but may not survive today. Clothing in this world is more than warmth. It is a signal, a shield, sometimes even a fragile form of respect. You sit at the table with a needle and thread, joining the others in the slow work of repair. Fabric lies in small piles, some belonging to the household, some taken in for a few coins. Shirts with frayed collars, trousers worn thin at the knees, dresses faded by washing and time. Each piece tells a story, though none of them are particularly cheerful. There is a steady truth behind this scene. Clothing was expensive in the 19th century, and for poor families, garments were worn, patched, handed down, and repurposed until they could no longer serve. Ready-made clothing became more common as the century progressed, but it was not always affordable for those living in the slums, so you mend, again and again, until the cloth becomes more patched than original. You hold a shirt up to the light, the fabric is thin enough that your fingers show through. You reinforce it anyway. A patch over a patch, stitched carefully so it might pass for decent at a glance. Because appearance matters here, perhaps more than it should. A cleaner coat, a neater collar, a less obvious tear can mean the difference between being chosen for work or passed over. You have already seen it happen. Two men stand waiting for a job. One looks slightly more presentable. He is chosen, the other is not. Skill may be equal, need may be greater, but the eye decides first, and the eye is not always kind. There is a small, curious detail tucked into the life of the poor. Clothing was often pawned and redeemed repeatedly, especially on the Mondays and Saturdays. Families would pawn their best garments at the start of the week for money, then redeem them before Sunday to appear respectable for church. Imagine your dignity moving in and out of a pawn shop window on a weekly schedule. It's both clever and exhausting. You thread the needle again. Your fingers move automatically now. Around you others do the same. The room fills with the soft rhythm of fabric being handled, thread pulled tight, scissors snipping carefully. It is quiet work, but not peaceful. There is urgency in every stitch. A woman beside you smooths a dress that has clearly seen better days. She presses it with her hands, trying to coax it into something presentable. Her expression is focused, almost determined. Perhaps she has an errand that requires looking a certain way. Perhaps she simply refuses to let poverty take that last piece of control. Observers of this period often reflect on how much importance the working poor placed on maintaining respectability, even under severe hardship. Cleanliness, neatness, and proper dress were not just matters of pride. They were practical tools for navigating a society that judged quickly and harshly. A tidy appearance could open doors or at least prevent them from closing too fast. You glance at your own reflection in a small cracked mirror. It does not flatter. Your clothes hang loosely. The patches are visible if one looks closely. Your face carries the marks of work and poor sleep. Still you adjust your collar, smooth your sleeves, and stand a little straighter. It is a small act, but it matters. Outside the street continues its restless motion. You step out now, dressed as carefully as circumstances allow. The difference is subtle, but you feel it. Not confidence exactly, but a slight shift. You're presenting yourself to the city, and the city will respond in its usual unpredictable way. You pass a group of men waiting for work. One nods at you. Another looks you over briefly, then looks away. It is not admiration, but it is not dismissal either. Sometimes that is enough. At a shop window you pause. Fine garments are displayed inside. Coats with smooth lines. Dresses with delicate stitching. Hats that sit perfectly. They belong to another world, but they remind you of what clothing can be. Not just protection, but expression, status, identity. You move on. Later you find yourself near a pawn shop. The window is crowded with items. Coats, boots, watches, tools, bits of jewellery. Each object carries a story of need. A wedding ring exchanged for rent. A coat surrendered for food. A tool pawned in the hope of buying it back before work returns. You hesitate for a moment, then step inside. The air smells of metal dust and quiet desperation. The man behind the counter looks up, already assessing what you might offer. You have little. Perhaps nothing today. You leave without a transaction, but not without understanding. This place is part of the cycle. It takes and gives, but never without a cost. Back on the street, you notice how people carry themselves. Some hold their heads high despite everything. Others move quickly, avoiding attention. Clothing plays its role in these performances. A patched coat worn with care can still suggest dignity. A torn garment left unattended can invite judgment. You return to the tenement as the day begins to fade. The room welcomes you with its familiar closeness. The table is ready again. More mending, more work, more quiet determination. You pick up the needle once more. In this world, survival is stitched together one thread at a time. Winter enters the tenement like an uninvited landlord, without knocking, without apology, and with a talent for finding every crack in the wall. It slips beneath the door. It presses its cold fingers through the window frame. It settles in the floorboards, the bedding, the water pail, and the stiff joints of anyone who has worked too long in damp clothes. You wake before dawn with your breath faintly visible. The room is crowded yet still cold. Bodies provide warmth, yes, but not enough. Someone has pulled a coat over the sleeping children. Someone else has tucked newspaper into a gap beside the window where the wind keeps worrying at the frame. The stove sits black and silent, waiting for coal that must be measured like medicine. Fuel is not simply comfort here, it is survival. Coalwood kindling scraps, anything that burns becomes precious. You watch as a few pieces are placed into the stove with great seriousness. Too much now means none later. Too little means the room stays bitter. The match flares small and heroic. Smoke curls. The stove hesitates, then begins to warm reluctantly, as if it resents the responsibility. A documented reality of 19th century tenement life is that poor housing often left residents exposed to dangerous cold in winter and suffocating heat in summer. Many buildings were badly constructed, poorly maintained, and crowded beyond their intended capacity. Weather did not remain outside. It moved in and became part of the household. You hold your hands near the stove, careful not to block the children. Your fingers ache as feeling returns. The pain is sharp, then dull, then almost pleasant. Someone jokes that the stove is giving off enough heat to warm a teacup, provided the teacup is emotionally resilient. A few tired smiles answer. Humour once again earns its keep. Outside, snow has turned to slush beneath cartwheels. The street is a grey mixture of ice, mud, manure, ash, and whatever else the city has decided to blend into its seasonal recipe. You step carefully because falling is not just embarrassing. It can mean injury, lost work, torn clothes, wet shoes, and a day unravelling from one bad patch of ice. Coal sellers pass through poorer streets when they can. The price rises when demand rises because misery has excellent business instincts. If you cannot afford enough, you burn scraps. Broken wood, discarded packing material, bits of furniture too damaged to sell. In desperate moments, even a chair leg becomes negotiable. Sit on the floor and survive, or keep the chair and freeze politely. Choices, choices. A lesser-known detail from the city's hard seasons is that poor children sometimes scavenged for coal, fallen from carts, or drop near yards, picking through street muck for black fragments small enough to carry home. These bits might not seem like much, but a pocketful of coal could mean a warmer hour. You see them bent near the curb, quick fingers searching the slush, turning poverty into a treasure hunt no one would choose. As winter deepens, illness becomes more frightening. Damp bedding never fully dries. Wet boots remain wet. A cough caught in January may still be sitting beside you in March, making itself comfortable. The sick child from before is better now, but not strong. The cough returns when the room cools. Every breath is listened to, measured, interpreted. People who examine this era often question how much tenement reform was driven by compassion for the poor and how much by fear that disease, fire, and disorder would spread into wealthier districts. You feel the unpleasant truth that suffering sometimes becomes visible to power only when it threatens to travel. A burning building, a fever, a collapsed wall. These things can cross class lines in ways hunger rarely does. Fire is the other winter terror. The stove that saves you can kill you. Lamps can tip. Chimneys can clog. Sparks can find dry cloth. In crowded rooms filled with bedding paper, wood, and people, flame moves faster than thought. You learn where the stairs are in darkness. You learn the sound of panic in another room. You learn that a hallway can become a trap if too many bodies reach it at once. One evening, the alarm comes as a smell before a shout. Smoke sharper than ordinary stove smoke bites the air. Someone opens the door. The hallway is hazy. A woman cries out from below. Feet thud. Doors open. Children are gathered, quickly wrapped in whatever is closest. You grab the water pail, though it is laughably small against the idea of fire. Still, hands need tasks when fear arrives. The smoke thickens for several minutes. A stovepipe has overheated, or a lamp has fallen, or a wall has caught near a flue. The exact cause matters less than the rush that follows. Men shout. A bucket line forms clumsy but urgent. Someone carries a baby down the stairs. Someone else goes back for bedding, which is foolish and also understandable, because bedding is not just bedding when you own almost nothing. The fire is contained this time. Contained is a beautiful word after you have tasted smoke. People stand outside in the cold, coughing, shivering, counting heads. The building looms above them, streaked with soot, wounded, but standing. A child begins to cry after the danger has passed, which seems sensible. Fear often waits until it has room. Summer. When it comes, offers no kindness, only a different trial. The same rooms that trapped cold now trap heat. Air grows thick, walls sweat. The smells intensify until they seem to have weight. Garbage ripens in alleys, horses steam in the streets, babies grow restless and red-faced. Adults become short-tempered, sleepless, and damp with sweat even while sitting still. You lie at night near the window, hoping for a breeze that arrives weak and dirty, carrying street smells instead of relief. People sleep on fire escapes, roofs, stoops, anywhere the air moves. Children drift outdoors because indoors is unbearable. The street at night becomes crowded with bodies escaping rooms, trading privacy for breath. Buildings themselves are not always trustworthy. Old houses poorly altered into overcrowded rentals sag under the burden of too many residents and too little repair. Stairs loosen, ceilings crack, plaster falls, a leak becomes rot, rot becomes collapse. Landlords may delay repairs until complaint disaster or official attention forces action. The building you sleep in feels alive at night, but not in a comforting way. It groans like an elderly animal asked to carry another cartload uphill. You begin to understand that shelter is never guaranteed even when you are indoors. Cold heat, fire, collapse, damp, smoke, and overcrowding all enter the meaning of home. The room protects you from the street, but imperfectly. Some nights it feels like a refuge. Other nights it feels like a box built by someone who forgot humans need air, space, and escape. Yet people adapt again, because of course they do. Newspaper in cracks, wet cloths over windows in summer, shared coal, children sent to sleep near warmer walls, buckets kept ready, matches hidden from toddlers, a neighbour calling warning when smoke smells wrong. Survival is 1,000 precautions, none of them foolproof. As evening settles after the small fire, the room is colder because the stove is being watched cautiously. The children sleep close together. Soot marks the hallway. Someone whispers thanks. Someone else complains about the landlord with a bitterness that needs no decoration. You sit by the dim lamp hand, still smelling of smoke and wet wood, and feel how thin the line is between shelter and danger. Outside the city continues under winter stars, indifferent and glittering. Inside the building creaks the stove tick softly, and everyone listens a little more carefully than before. By morning, the smell of smoke from the little fire still lingers in the hallway, tucked into the wood like a warning. You pass the blackened patch near the stovepipe and touch the railing more carefully than before. The building has survived, and so have you, which is becoming one of the city's favourite low standards. Still, the day does not pause to admire endurance. Somewhere nearby, a bell is already calling workers indoors. You follow that sound through streets waking under a grey sky. The carts begin their grinding, vendors call out, children dart between wheels, laundry steam rises from basements. The city is not one machine, but many machines nested inside one another, and each requires bodies. Bodies to lift, sew, cut, roll, fold, polish, carry, trim, pack, sort, and breathe dust that was never meant for lungs. You find work in a small workshop, perhaps only for a day, perhaps for longer, if your hands prove quick and your complaints remain beautifully invisible. The door opens into a room brighter than your tenement, but not by much. Windows line one wall, giving a thin winter light. Tables fill the space. Workers sit close together, bent forward, shoulders rounded. The air smells of cloth glue, tobacco, sweat, damp wool, and the metallic bite of tools. This is not the grand factory of later imagination, though those exist too. Much work in 19th century New York happens in smaller shops, lofts, back rooms, and tenement spaces where production is divided into tiny repeated tasks. One person cuts, another stitches, another presses, another packs. The finished object may look clean in a shop window, but you now know how much cramped air and aching bone can hide inside a neat seam. A clear historical point belongs here. New York became a major centre of garment production in the 19th century, and many poor immigrants, especially women and children, worked in sewing trades, often for very low piece rates. The work might take place in workshops or inside tenement rooms, blurring the line between home and factory until both were equally tired. A shirt could pass through many hands before reaching a buyer who never imagined any of them. You sit at a table with others and the rhythm begins. Needle down, pull, turn, smooth, repeat. The cloth is coarse under your fingers. The thread cuts lightly into your skin. You learn to keep your movements small because wasted motion becomes wasted strength. Around you nobody speaks much at first. The sound of work fills the room. Snipping scissors, creaking chairs, coughs. The dull thump of bundles placed on wood. The foreman moves between tables, not shouting, which somehow feels worse. His eyes count speed mistakes posture. He knows exactly how much pressure to apply. Enough to quicken fingers. Not enough to make everyone walk out, because even desperation has limits, though employers are often eager to test them like fresh rope. There is a curious detail in some of these trades. Artificial flower making became a common form of poorly paid handwork, often done by women and children. Petals, wire, paste dyes, and delicate shaping created pretty decorations for hats and dresses. Imagine that your tired fingers forming blossoms you cannot afford to wear. A garden made indoors under bad light for someone else's Sunday. At another bench, tobacco's being stripped or cigars are being rolled. The smell is rich and heavy, almost sweet at first, then cloying. Fingers stain. Dust gathers in throats. In other parts of the city, printers lean over presses. Metal workers, hammer and file cabinet makers, plane wood and binders fold sheets. Each trade has its own sound, its own smell, its own slow injury. So you become aware of bodies as instruments. The needleworker's eyes strain. The cigar roller's fingers stiffen. The printer's lungs take in ink and dust. The metalworker's ears ring. The laundress's hands crack. The dock labourer's back bends under loads until bending becomes permanent. Work does not simply earn money. It alters the person earning it. A question often raised by historians of labour is whether industrial work in this era offered poor families a path upward, or mainly trapped them in cycles of low wages and insecurity. Sitting at the table, you feel the question pressing into your spine. Work is necessary. Work is dignity, at least sometimes. Work pays rent, buys bread, keeps the landlord from the door. But when wages barely cover survival, labour becomes a treadmill with a view of other people's prosperity. By noon, your fingers are sore. The worker beside you, a young woman with dark circles under her eyes, shares a scrap of bread. You thank her softly. Her name may be Anna or Bridget or Rebecca or Maria. The city collects names from every shore and sets them all to work beneath the same dusty windows. She tells you without looking up that the last shop paid worse, but the air there was better. This one pays slightly more if the foreman does not reject too many pieces. That is how choices appear here: bad air with better pay, or cleaner air with hungrier evenings. Delightful menu. The afternoon stretches. Time becomes hard to measure except through pain. Neck first, then shoulders, then fingers, then lower back. The light shifts across the floorboards. A child at the far end of the room nods over a bundle until an older woman nudges him awake. He blinks embarrassed and resumes work. Nobody scolds loudly. Everyone understands exhaustion. But understanding does not finish the order. There are rules, spoken and unspoken. Do not waste material. Do not talk too long. Do not challenge rejected work unless you can afford to lose the place. Do not bleed on the cloth, which sounds obvious until the needle slips and your finger opens in a bright bead. You wrap it quickly and keep going. The garment must remain clean, whatever happens to the hand. A bell rings somewhere outside, distant and sweet, and for a moment you imagine stepping into open air. But the bundle before you is not done. Each piece finished becomes a few more coins, or the promise of them, which is not quite the same. Payment may be delayed, reduced, or disputed. The poor are often paid last in a city that depends on them first. By evening, the workshop releases you into the street. Your body unfolds, slowly protesting each inch. The air outside feels cold and dirty but wonderfully large. You'd forgotten the sky existed in more than a window-sized portion. Workers spill out around you quiet now, conserving what remains of themselves for the walk home, the cooking, the children, the mending, the second shift hidden inside the first. You pass shop windows where finished goods are displayed with lovely indifference. Shirts, hats, gloves, cigars in neat boxes, printed pages, polished fittings. The city presents products as if they appeared through elegance alone. But you know better. You can feel the seam in your fingertips. You can smell the paste tobacco, ink, and sweat beneath the polish, for every object has a back room. When you reach the tenement, the stairs seem steeper than before. The room is warm with bodies and stove heat, though not truly warm. The table waits and someone has brought more sewing home. Of course the work follows. It always finds the address. You sit, flex your aching fingers and pick up the next piece. The lamp flame wavers. Outside the street darkens. Inside needles begin again. Tiny flashes in the amber light, each stitch pulling you forward through another night of earning just enough to keep needing more. The day you first notice them, they do not look especially important. A man stands across the street with a notebook watching the building, as if it might confess something. Another appears later carrying a camera, though not the small friendly kind people will use in future years. This one is large, deliberate, requiring patience and stillness. He sets it up carefully, adjusting angles, waiting for the light to cooperate, as if the city might suddenly decide to pose. You've seen curious eyes before. Outsiders come and go, sometimes with pity, sometimes with fascination, sometimes with that uncomfortable mix of both. But these observers feel different. They're not just passing through, they are studying, recording, turning what they see into something that will travel beyond these streets. You step outside pretending to have somewhere urgent to go while keeping them in view. The man with the notebook writes quickly, glancing up often. The one with the camera waits for a moment when the street looks exactly as he expects it to. A child pauses near him, curious, then runs off when called. There is a well-established truth behind their presence. By the late 19th century, journalists, reformers, and photographers began documenting urban poverty in New York, bringing attention to the harsh conditions of tenement life. Their work would later influence public opinion and eventually lead to housing reforms. But here in this moment, it feels less like history and more like being watched, and you wonder what they see. Do they notice the patched clothes, the crowded windows, the children moving through the street with practiced awareness? Do they smell the damp, the smoke, the faint sourness of too many lives pressed together? Or do they see something simpler, something easier to explain in neat sentences? A small, unusual detail adds to the scene. Early photographers often needed their subjects to remain still for several seconds due to long exposure times. This meant that capturing everyday life in motion was difficult, and many images of the poor appear oddly posed or frozen. Imagine trying to hold your reality still long enough for someone else to understand it. The effort alone feels exhausting. The man with the camera gestures to a group near a doorway. He speaks politely, perhaps asking them to stand where the light is better. Some agree, others turn away. Being seen is not always a comfort. It can feel like exposure, like being turned into a story that no longer belongs to you. You return inside carrying this awareness with you. The room feels smaller now, not because it has changed, but because you know it might be described measured, judged by someone who does not live here. The table, the stove, the bedding, the dim window, all of it could become evidence. People who study this period often reflect on how these early investigations shaped public understanding of poverty. Some argue they revealed necessary truths. Others suggest they sometimes simplified complex lives into images of misery. Sitting in your room, you sense both possibilities. Being seen can bring help. It can also bring misunderstanding. Later, the hallway fills with quiet talk. Someone has spoken to the man with the notebook. He asks questions. How many people live here? How much rent is paid? How often the water is fetched? Whether sickness is common? The answers were given carefully. Not too much, not too little. Trust is not handed out freely. A woman near you shakes her head. She says nothing will change, Another says maybe it will. A third shrugs, focused on her sewing. Hope, like everything else, is measured here. Too much of it can be as dangerous as too little. You step outside again as the light begins to fade. The observers are still there. The camera is packed away now, but the notebook remains open. The man writes, pauses, writes again. You wonder what words he chooses, how he arranges them, whether he understands the weight behind each detail. Across the street, a child plays with a broken hoop, rolling it along the uneven ground. The sound is light, almost cheerful. It does not match the seriousness of the observers, or perhaps it completes it. Life here is not only hardship, it is also movement, adaptation, small moments of joy that resist being reduced to a single description. The observers eventually leave. They walk away with their notes, their images, their impressions. You remain. Inside the tenement, the evening routine resumes. The stove is lit, the table is cleared, work continues. The room fills with the familiar rhythm of survival, yet something has shifted just slightly. You are aware now that your life exists in two forms. The one you live with all its complexity, its small decisions, its quiet resilience, and the one that may be written about, photographed, discussed in rooms far from here. The two are not always the same. There is an ongoing question among those who look back on this time. How much did these efforts to expose poverty lead to real change? And how much did they serve the interests of those doing the observing? The answer is not simple. Change comes slowly, unevenly, and often for reasons that do not feel immediate to those waiting. For now you return to your place at the table. The needle moves. The thread pulls tight. The lamp flickers. Outside, the city continues its restless motion, unaware or unconcerned with how it's being recorded. You think of the man with the notebook, of the camera capturing a moment that will not include the smell, the sound, the weight of the air. You wonder if anyone reading his words will truly understand what it feels like to sit here in this room, balancing hope and exhaustion with every stitch. The thought lingers, then fades because there is work to do. And in this place, work always comes first. By the time the observers have carried their notebooks and cameras away, the room settles back into itself as if shrugging off the brief discomfort of being studied. The lamp burns low. Needles move. A child scratches at the table with a bent pin until someone gently removes it from his fingers. Outside, the street darkens into its familiar mixture of footsteps, wheels, and distant voices. Then bells begin. Not loud at first, only a few notes carried over the roof, softened by fog and soot. Church bells, perhaps, or a mission bell calling people in from the cold. The sound floats through the open seam of the window frame and rests over the room. It changes the air. Not enough to clean it, no miracle like that, but enough to remind you that even here, above the gutters and below the respectable city's concern, people still reach towards something higher than rent. You follow the sound the next morning, walking through streets damp with last night's mist. The city is awake but subdued. A cart passes with a load of coal. A woman hurries by with a prayer book tucked under her arm. Children trail behind adults, scrubbed as well as water soap and patience allow. Their hair is flattened. Their collars are corrected. Their faces hold the solemn misery of children who have been told to stay clean for at least one impossible hour. A dependable truth of the period is that churches, synagogues, and religious missions played central roles in poor neighborhoods, offering worship, schooling, charity, community, and sometimes moral supervision. For immigrants especially, faith communities could preserve language and custom while helping newcomers navigate the city. They were not just spiritual spaces, they were social maps. Relief networks, meeting places, and sometimes the only rooms where the poor were addressed as souls rather than problems. Inside a church, the air feels different. Still not perfect, because 19th century buildings are not exactly scented candles and spa music, but cooler, higher, more open. The ceiling lifts above you. The pew is hard beneath your legs. Candles flicker, or perhaps gaslight glows against the walls. The smell is wax-damp, wool-old wood and human worry dressed in Sunday clothes. You sit with others from the neighborhood. People who argued over water yesterday now kneel beside each other. Men who shouted in the saloon stand quietly with bowed heads. Women who have spent the week sewing, scrubbing, nursing and bargaining hold their hands folded in their laps, and for a little while no one asks them to carry anything. That alone feels almost holy. A small, easily overlooked custom adds tenderness to this world. In many communities, wakes and funerals were held at home with neighbours visiting, praying, bringing food, telling stories and keeping company with the grieving family. Mourning was not private in the modern sense. It filled rooms, hallways and memory. Grief became communal because there was simply no space for it to be anything else. You've seen that too. A black cloth hung near a door, voices lowered in the hallway, a borrowed chair placed beside a coffin too small or too plain or both. People arriving with bread tea coins, candles, whispered condolences. The room rearranged around loss the way it rearranges around work, illness and sleep. In poverty, death is both intimate and practical. Someone must pay for burial. Someone must watch the children. Someone must return the borrowed cups. Religious life does not erase hardship, but it gives hardship a language. Suffering can be offered, explained, endured, questioned, even argued with. You hear prayers in English, Latin, German, Irish accents, Yiddish murmurs, Italian whispers and voices that crack under the weight of things not said aloud. The words differ, but the posture is similar. Heads bowed, hands clasped, eyes closed. A request for mercy that does not require fine grammar. Specialists continue to debate whether religion in poor urban districts mainly comforted the oppressed or encouraged them to accept unjust conditions too quietly. Sitting in the pew, you feel no neat answer. A sermon on patience may soothe one person and silence another. A charity basket may feed a family and remind them of their dependence. A hymn may lift the heart, even while the rent remains due. Faith can be refuge, discipline, protest, habit, beauty, and obligation all within the same morning. The hymn begins. It rises uncertainly at first, then gathers strength as more voices join. Some sing well, many do not. This is fine. Heaven, one hopes, has generous acoustics. The melody fills the room and moves through you in a way speech cannot. Your chest loosens. You feel for a moment less like a body kept alive by bread and odd jobs and more like a person held inside a larger story. After the service, the social world resumes. People speak in clusters. A man asks about work. A woman asks after the sick child. Someone mentions a relief society meeting. Someone else knows of a widow needing sewing help. News travels through faith as surely as it travels through saloons and stoops. The difference is tone, perhaps, though not always. Church gossip can move with astonishing spiritual speed. You notice the careful clothing again, the patched respectability from the previous days. Best garments have appeared, brushed, mended, redeemed from pawn if possible. Boots are blacked, hats are pinned. Children have been warned with severe tenderness not to ruin everything before noon. Looking respectable in worship matters, it tells the world, and perhaps oneself, that poverty has not dissolved all order. Later you pass a synagogue where families gather and separate voices warm at the doorway. Further on, a small mission offers a meal after prayers. Around another corner, a storefront church sings with a force that seems larger than the room itself. The city's faith is not one thing. It is many rooms of longing, each carrying old worlds into new streets. But faith also meets sorrow often. You attend a wake that evening in a nearby room. The air is close and heavy with candles. Women sit along the walls. Men stand in the hallway, hats in hand. The body lies in a coffin, simple enough that no one pretends otherwise. A child asks a question and is hushed. Someone begins a story about the dead woman, how she once fought a landlord over a leaking roof and won 3 whole days of repair before he vanished again. The room laughs softly, grateful for permission. There is tea weak but hot, bread sliced thin, a small plate of something sweet brought by a neighbour who could hardly spare it. You take only a little. Grief makes people generous in ways that embarrass the living. The family will count coins later. Burial costs matter. Morning has a bill like everything else. As night deepens, a song begins low and unsteady. It is not exactly a hymn, not exactly a lullaby. The melody reminds you of the children humming near the window of the fiddle after dark, of street cries and bells, and all the sounds by which people keep from vanishing. You feel the grief in the room soften at the edges, not disappear. Nothing so simple but become bearable for one more hour. When you return to your own building, the stairwell smells of smoke and damp coats. The familiar room waits crowded and dim. Someone asks how the family is managing. Someone else has already set aside a coin, small help but real. The kind that does not require a form, though it may come with advice anyway, because humans simply cannot resist. You sit by the stove listening to the last bells fade beyond the rooftops. Hope here is not bright. It is not the grand golden thing painted in sermons and reform pamphlets. It is smaller, more stubborn, a coin in a neighbour's palm, a hymn sung off key, a candle beside the dead, a prayer whispered over a sleeping child, a remembered joke, a borrowed shawl returned clean. The city outside remains hard, work will still hurt, illness will still come, landlords will still knock. But tonight, in the space between bells and footsteps, you feel how people endure not only by eating, earning and bargaining, but by meaning. They make rituals from scraps of time. They carry grief together. They sing even when the room is cold, and as the lamp dims, the last note seems to remain in the air, holding the dark gently like a hand that has not yet let go. By morning, the question is not spoken at first, but it sits in the room as plainly as the table. Do you stay or do you go? The landlord has been muttering. The rent is late, not disastrously late yet, but late enough for footsteps on the stairs to sound personal. A child needs stronger food after illness. Work has been uncertain. Coal is low. The room that once felt like a poor kind of shelter now feels like a hand closing slowly. You look at the walls, the stove, the pail, the patch bedding, and you wonder how a place can be both unbearable and difficult to leave. Moving is not freedom when you are poor. It is labour risk and calculation. You cannot simply choose a better life and fold it neatly into a trunk. You must find a new room, pay something in advance if required, carry what you own through streets that notice everything and hope the new landlord is not worse than the old one. Poverty makes even escape feel like an errand with hidden fees. A key fact of the 19th century New York housing is that eviction and frequent moves were common among poor tenants, especially when wages were irregular and rent consumed a large share of income. Families might shift from one tenement to another, take in boarders, move to cheaper rear buildings, or descend into lodging houses when ordinary rent became impossible. Stability was something you rented by the week, and sometimes the week refused to renew itself. You begin sorting possessions. The work is almost embarrassing because there is so little, and yet every object matters. A pot with a dent, a blanket with thin places, a bundle of clothes, a cracked cup, a small religious card, a child's rag doll rescued from the corner. You pick each thing up and decide whether it can be carried. The poor own few things, but those few things are heavy with use. In the hallway, neighbours already know. Of course they do. Walls here pass news faster than newspapers. Someone asks where you might go. Someone else says a cousin heard of rooms on another street. Another warns that the landlord there charges too much for space near the window. Advice gathers around you like dust, some useful, some merely decorative. A minor but telling detail from this world is that people sometimes moved at night or very early in the morning to avoid public embarrassment pressure from landlords or the awkward gaze of neighbours. Not always, but often enough that the sight of a family carrying bedding before dawn told its own quiet story. There are few spectacles more intimate than watching someone's life reduced to bundles on a cart. You step outside to search. Streets that once felt familiar now become a map of possibility and danger. A sign in a window advertises rooms. You climb stairs, speak to landladies, peer into spaces that smell of damp smoke and old decisions. One room is too dear. Another is too dark. Another has a window, but the stairs feel unsafe. Another seems decent until you notice the ceiling stain spreading like a brown cloud, and the landlady assures you it is nothing, which is exactly what people say when it is absolutely something. Some students of urban history question whether mobility among the poor represented opportunity or instability. From the street with your arms aching and your coins counted twice, it feels like both, but mostly instability wearing opportunity's hat. Moving can mean a chance to escape a cruel landlord, a sick building, a dangerous hallway, or a rent you can no longer manage. It can also mean losing neighbours, work connections, credit at a shop, and the tiny patterns that helped you survive. You pass a lodging house and pause. Men come and go through its doorway, some with bundles, some with nothing at all. Lodging houses offer beds, bunks, or floor space by the night, often crowded and rough. For single men, migrants, and those without family, they can be a necessary shelter. For families, entering such a place may feel like falling through the last boards of ordinary life. Still, the door is there, and the city has a cruel way of turning last resorts into the practical options. The street around you is loud with movement. A pushcart squeals. A woman argues over the price of onions. Two boys carry a mattress between them, wobbling under its bulk. You follow them for a while, not because you mean to, but because the sight feels like a prediction. The mattress bends in the middle like a tired tongue. They laugh when it nearly catches on a post. Even moving can become comic for a second, because human beings are ridiculous and mercifully difficult to extinguish. Back at the room, the landlord comes. He does not shout. Shouting would almost be easier. He stands in the doorway with his hat in hand and speaks in a tone that pretends to be reasonable. Rent is rent. He has obligations too. Taxes, repairs, owners above him, pressures of his own. Perhaps some of that is true. Perhaps all of it is true. It changes very little. Money is due. You answer carefully. A few more days, work expected, a payment soon. He listens, face unreadable. The children watch from the corner. Nobody breathes loudly. Finally, he gives you a date, not generous but not immediate. Relief arrives thin and temporary. You thank him because pride is expensive and today you cannot afford too much. Still, the question remains. Staying may only delay the next crisis. Leaving may create a dozen new ones. The familiar street holds certain protections. You know which vendor will offer credit, which neighbour watches children, which pump line moves fastest, which patrolman looks the other way, which mission asks fewer questions. Familiar poverty can become a kind of map, and maps are hard to surrender. Yet the dream of elsewhere grows anyway. Uptown perhaps, across the river maybe, a less crowded block, a room with light, a place where the smell of waste does not enter before breakfast. You imagine a window that opens onto sky instead of brick. You imagine bedding that dries. You imagine a door that shuts and makes a boundary. Such dreams are modest, almost laughably modest, and still they feel luxurious enough to ache. In the afternoon you help another family move. They have decided or been forced to go. Their possessions are loaded onto a handcart, bedding chairs, pots, bundles, a crate with a rooster inside, because apparently even disaster enjoys sound effects. The bird complains the whole way, which seems fair. Children carry smaller items with solemn pride. A girl holds a framed picture against her chest as if it were a baby. The route is not long, but it feels ceremonial. People glance from windows, some call farewells, others watch silently, perhaps imagining their own turn. The cart bumps over stones. A bundle slips and is caught. The rooster makes another opinion known. At the new building, the stairs are narrower than promised. They always are. Everyone laughs because the alternative is not useful. By evening, you return to your own room, tired from carrying someone else's life through the city. The place looks different now, not better, not worse, more temporary. The table, stove, bedding pail all seem ready to become bundles at any moment. You sit and listen to the room's familiar sounds, the children shifting the neighbours above the street below the stove, ticking softly as it cools. Surviving poverty means learning that home is not always a place you can keep. Sometimes it is a set of habits carried from room to room, the way tea is poured, the way bread is divided, the way a child is tucked beneath a coat, the way neighbours remember your name even after you leave the building. Home becomes portable because it must. Night gathers. No decision is final, not yet. You remain where you are held by debt habit fear and the thin comfort of the known. But in your mind you keep walking those other streets, testing doors, measuring windows, weighing the cost of one more move against the cost of staying still. The city breathes beyond the wall, vast and restless. Somewhere another family climbs new stairs. Somewhere another room opens. Somewhere someone closes a door and calls it shelter for now. The city does not stand still long enough for you to catch your breath. Even as you wrestle with rent work and the quiet arithmetic of survival, New York shifts around you. Streets are widened. Tracks are laid. Bridges rise in the distance like promises no one has quite explained to you yet. Buildings grow taller, then taller again. The skyline begins to change though down here in the narrow streets. The sky itself still looks like a thin ribbon stretched between walls. You notice it first in the noise. A new kind of rumble overhead, unfamiliar and unsettling. The elevated railway has arrived in parts of the city, iron tracks lifted above the streets, carrying trains that rattle and roar like something alive. When one passes, conversation pauses, windows tremble, dust falls from beams. Children run outside to watch idly. With a meaningless mixture of fear and wonder. It is a strange feeling seeing progress pass above your head, while your own life remains rooted in the same cramped room. A well-documented development of the late 19th century is the rapid expansion of urban infrastructure in New York, including bridges like the Brooklyn Bridge, elevated railways, and improved transportation systems. These changes transformed how people moved through the city, connecting neighborhoods and shaping economic opportunity. Access to the was not evenly distributed. For many living in the slums, the city's growth was something to witness rather than fully share. You stand beneath the tracks as a train clatters overhead. The sound is overwhelming, metal grinding against metal, echoing through the narrow street. For a moment it feels like the sky itself is shaking. Then it passes, leaving behind a lingering vibration and a faint smell of smoke and oil. Nearby, a man remarks that one day everyone will ride these trains. Another laughs and says he will believe it when the fare costs less than bread. You smile faintly. Optimism here is always measured against the price of food. The streets themselves are changing too. Some are being paved more carefully. Gas lamps appear more regularly, casting a steadier light at night. In certain areas, efforts are made to clean up refuse, though not always in the neighbourhoods where it is most needed. Progress, like charity, seems to arrive unevenly. A small but interesting detail from this time, the introduction of gas lighting in city streets and homes gradually replaced older forms of illumination like candles and oil lamps, making some areas safer and more active after dark. Yet in poorer districts, access to consistent lighting could still be limited, leaving many streets in shadow despite the city's broader advancements. You walk through a part of the city where new buildings are rising. The contrast is sharp. Fresh brick, larger windows, cleaner lines. Workers move confidently, carrying materials, calling to one another with purpose. It feels like a different world, even though it is only a few streets away. For a moment you imagine stepping into that world. A room with light, air that moves, walls that do not lean, but the thought fades as quickly as it came. Rent in such places is far beyond what your coins can manage. The city is growing, but not necessarily for you. Observers of this period continue to examine how urban growth affected different social classes, questioning whether the expansion of infrastructure and industry improved conditions for the poor or primarily benefited wealthier residents. Standing here watching a new building rise, you feel the answer is not simple. Opportunity exists, but it is not evenly placed. It must be reached, and reaching it requires resources you may not have. Back in your neighbourhood, change arrives more slowly and sometimes not at all. The same crowded rooms, the same narrow streets, the same daily routines. Yet even here there are small shifts. A new shop opens, a street is repaired. A landlord makes a reluctant improvement after pressure from inspectors or reformers. You hear talk of new laws, new regulations, new ideas about housing and sanitation. Words like reform, inspection and improvement circulate in conversations, though often with a tone of cautious skepticism. People have heard promises before. They have learned to wait and see. A child points at a passing train overhead and asks where it goes. The answer is simple and complicated at once. It goes everywhere. It connects parts of the city that once felt distant. It carries people to work, to markets, to neighbourhoods they might not otherwise reach. You wonder what it would feel like to ride it, to sit inside a moving carriage lifted above the streets, watching the city pass beneath you. To travel not by foot but by machine. It feels like a small dream, but even small dreams have weight here. As evening approaches, the elevated trains continue their steady passage. The rhythm becomes part of the background, like the sound of carts or voices. The city absorbs change quickly, folding it into daily life until it feels as though it has always been there. You return to the tenement climbing the familiar stairs. The room greets you with its usual closeness. The table is occupied. The stove is lit. The air is thick but warm enough to ease the chill. Someone mentions the new buildings. Someone else mentions the rising rents. Progress, it seems, has a way of pushing people as much as it lifts them. A better street can mean a higher price. A cleaner building can mean eviction for those who cannot afford the improvement. You sit and listen, thinking about the city beyond these walls. It is changing, growing, reaching upward and outward. Yet here inside this room, survival still depends on the same careful balance. Work, food, shelter, community. The trains pass overhead unseen but unmistakable. The future moves above you loud and insistent, and you remain steady in the present, finding your way through a city that is always becoming something else. By dawn, the city is softer than it has any right to be. The trains are quiet for a moment. The saloons have emptied into sleep. The street vendors have not yet begun their full chorus. Fog rests low over the stones, turning the gutters, stoops, carts, barrels, and patched windows into pale shapes. The buildings look less harsh in this light, almost forgiving, though you know better than to trust architecture before breakfast. You wake with your body folded into the same crowded room, the same shared warmth, the same stale air. Someone's elbow is too close. A child has kicked off a blanket again. The stove is cold. The water pail waits in the corner nearly empty because of course it is. Poverty loves a routine. Still, you open your eyes and that alone is a small victory. You have survived another night. Not triumphantly, not dramatically. No orchestra rises from the alley. No mayor appears to present you with a medal for endurance under damp conditions. You simply breathe and cough once and begin again. That is the shape of survival here. It is rarely glorious. It is more often quiet, repetitive, stubborn, and done with sore feet. A final piece of historical grounding belongs to this morning. By the end of the 19th century, public pressure, reform investigations, and worsening urban conditions helped lead to stronger housing regulations in New York, including major tenement laws in 1867, 1879, and 1901. These reforms did not erase poverty, but they slowly changed what the city was forced to admit about light air, sanitation, and human overcrowding. Law arrived late, as law often does, trailing behind suffering with a notebook. You sit up carefully. Around you the others stir. The room is familiar now in every worn detail. The cracked cup, the table scarred by sewing and meals, the patched coat hanging from a nail, the stove that has smoked, warmed, threatened, and endured, the window-facing brick where thin light enters like a guest too polite to comment on the smell. You remember the first morning by the river when the harbour mist carried salt coal smoke and the promise of work. You remember 5 Points with its bending houses and buried pond beneath the streets. You remember the crowded room becoming kitchen, workshop, bedroom, sick room and shelter. You remember the water pump, the chamber pot, the charity line, the children selling papers, the weak tea. The fever, the ward boss, the pawn shop, the fire scare, the workshop bell, the photographer's watchful lens, the church hymn, the moving cart, the train rattling overhead. All of it remains inside you not as a neat lesson, but as a collection of sensations. Mud at your hem, coal dust beneath your nails, bread turning soft in broth, damp wool against your skin, a child's hot forehead under your palm, the scrape of a needle through cloth. The strange comfort of a hymn sung badly by people who badly need comfort. There is a small, almost odd detail to carry into this last dawn. Some tenement residents kept plants in cans, broken pots or boxes on windowsills, even when sunlight was poor and space was scarce. A geranium, a sprig of green, a stubborn little leaf facing brick. It seems ridiculous until it does not. A plant says there is still care available, still patience. Still the wish to see something grow. You notice such a plant now across the airshaft leaning toward a slice of light. Its leaves are dusty. Its soil is probably terrible. It lives anyway. Well, show off. Researchers today still wrestle with whether the story of New York's 19th century slums should be told chiefly as a tragedy of exploitation, a chronicle of immigrant resilience, or a warning about cities that grow faster than compassion. Standing in this dawn, you feel each answer brush against the others. The suffering was real, the courage was real, the neglect was real, the community was real. No single word can hold it all without spilling. The child beside you wakes and asks for bread. There is not much, there is never much, but someone finds a piece, breaks it smaller and passes it over. The child eats slowly, eyes still swollen with sleep. You watch the crumbs cling to small fingers, and for a moment the entire city seems to narrow to that simple act. Bread given bread, taken hunger, delayed. Outside the first cart rolls over stones. A horse snorts. A woman calls from a window to someone below. The pump handle squeals in the distance. Life begins again not because it is easy, but because it has momentum. The poor know this rhythm well. Rise, fetch, work, mend, cook, nurse, bargain, wait, sleep, rise. Yet there is tenderness in the repetition too. The same neighbour who annoyed you yesterday may lend coal today. The child who spilled water may make the baby laugh. The woman who scolded you for blocking the stair may share news of work. Human closeness chafes, but it also warms. In rooms like this, people survive not only by toughness, but by being inconveniently, beautifully necessary to one another. You step outside. The stairwell smells of damp wood and ash. Down below the street is grey and shining from last night's moisture. For a brief minute before the full noise begins, you can hear individual things clearly. A broom sweeping grit from a step. A bucket set down. A bird somewhere foolish enough to sing near 5 points. The distant harbour, perhaps, or only the memory of it. You stand in the doorway and look at the waking city. It is cruel. It is magnificent. It is hungry. It is alive, with people who refuse to disappear even when crowded into rooms designed to make them invisible. You are one of them now, at least in this story. You have felt the damp, the fear, the sharp edge of want, and the small, surprising mercies that keep a person from breaking entirely. The light grows. Windows catch it one by one. Smoke lifts from chimneys. The elevated train will soon rattle through the morning. The shops will open. The foremen will choose. The missions will ask questions. The landlords will count. The children will run. The city will keep becoming itself with all its beauty and all its shame. And you still breathing, step forward into the day. Now the pace slows. The hard stones beneath your feet soften in memory. The smell of coal smoke thins. The crowded room fades back into shadow, not gone but gently set down. You do not need to carry the pail any farther tonight. You do not need to climb another stair, answer another question, or count another coin by weak lamplight. The city recedes block by block, sound by sound. First the wheels grow distant. Then the street cries loosen and drift away. The old tenement window becomes only a square of pale dawn, and the little plant on the sill keeps leaning toward its narrow ribbon of sun. Breathe slowly now. In this quiet, you can honor those who lived through such days without having to live them yourself. You can let their endurance remain where it belongs in history and memory, in the soft respect of your own imagination. Their lives were crowded, difficult, and often unfair, but they were also full of touch, voice, humour, stubborn care, and morning after morning of beginning again. The fog lifts from the river. The docks grow still. Somewhere a kettle warms, somewhere bread is broken, somewhere a child sleeps a little longer beneath a patched coat safe for one more gentle minute. And as the city fades into a low hush, you may rest too. Let the lamps dim. Let the footsteps pass. Let the old street settle beneath the moon and mist, until all that remains is a soft breath, a quiet room, and the calm knowledge that tonight you are warm, you are safe, and the story can sleep. Sweet dream.